Peter's vision halt the climb. Science fuels our greatest dreams. In this clash we find new means. Bright, a timeless light. We are the age of fighters, rising up, reaching higher, eternally within our sight. Aubrey and Peter lead the fight. In this battle, we ignite a future bright, a timeless light.
Stage is set, the moment here. Aubrey and Peter have no fear. Rewind or stop the ultimate quest. In this fight we'll see who's best. Beyond time, we rise and roar, breaking limits forevermore. Aubrey and Peter, head to head, in this duel that is there. Aubrey's vision, turn back years. Peter's mission, halt the fears. Science drives our boldest dreams. In this clash we break the seams. Beyond time, we rise and roar, breaking limits forevermore. Aubrey and Peter, head to head, in this duel that is there. Two paths, one fight, to conquer time and make it right. Two paths, one fight, to conquer time and make it right. Beyond time, we rise and roar, breaking limits forevermore. Aubrey and Peter, head to head, in this duel that is there. In this war, our future's bright. Eternal dawn, we own the night.
Stage is set, the moment's here. Aubrey and Peter have no fear. Rewind or stop the ultimate quest. In this fight we'll see who's best. Beyond time, we rise and roar, breaking limits forevermore. Aubrey and Peter head to head. In this duel the path is led. Aubrey's vision, turn back years. Peter's mission, halt the fears. Science drives our boldest dreams. In this clash we break the seams. Beyond time, we rise and roar, breaking limits forevermore. Aubrey and Peter head to head. In this duel the path is led. Aubrey's vision, turn back years. Peter's mission, halt the fears. Science drives our boldest dreams. In this clash we break the seams. Beyond time, we rise and roar, breaking limits forevermore. Aubrey and Peter head to head. In this duel the path is led. In this war our future's bright. Eternal dawn, we own the night.
tensions high. Aubrey and Peter reach for the sky. Reverse the clock or freeze the time. In this battle we redefine. Breaking boundaries, rise and fight. Chasing dreams, igniting light. Aubrey and Peter, face to face. In this duel we find our pace. Aubrey's vision turned back that time. Peter's mission stopping the climb. Science fuels our brain's quest. In this fight we give our best. Breaking boundaries, rise and fight. Chasing dreams, igniting light. Aubrey and Peter, face to face. In this duel we find our pace. Two paths, one aim, to conquer time, change the game. Breaking boundaries, rise and fight. Chasing dreams, igniting light. Aubrey and Peter, face to face. In this duel we find our base. In this war, our future's bright. Turn upon the old night.
A spotlight's on, the tension's high. Aubrey and Peter reach for the sky. Reverse the clock or freeze the time. In this battle we redefine. Breaking boundaries, rise and fight. Chasing dreams, igniting light. Aubrey and Peter face to face. In this duel we find our place. Aubrey's vision turning back time. Peter's mission stopping the climb. Science fuels our greatest quest. In this fight we give our best. In this fight we give our best. Breaking boundaries, rise and fight. Chasing dreams, igniting light. Aubrey and Peter face to face. In this duel we find our place. Breaking boundaries, rise rules, conquers dynasties, and their life is on the line. Aubrey and Peter, it's time to shine. In this fight, we see our faith. The future's here. We can't wait.
Light shine bright, the moment's here. Aubrey, Peter, no more fear. Turn back years, or stop the climb. In this fight, we defy time. Defying time, we rise and fight. Breaking barriers, reaching heights. Aubrey and Peter, side by side. In this clash, we won't hide. Aubrey's quest to reverse decay. Peter's mission to hold back fate. Science drives our boldest dreams. In this clash, nothing's as seems. Defying time, we rise and fight. Breaking barriers, reaching heights. Aubrey and Peter, side by side. In this clash, we won't hide.
Lights shine bright, the moment's here. Aubrey and Peter, no more fear. Turn back years or stop the climb. In this fight, we defy time. Defying time, we rise and fight. Breaking dying time, we rise and fight. Breaking barriers, reaching heights. Aubrey and Peter, side by side. In this clash, we won't hide. Aubrey's quest to reverse decay. Peter's mission to hold faith. Science drives our boldest dreams. In this clash, nothing's as it seems. Defying time, we rise and fight. Breaking barriers, reaching heights. Aubrey and Peter, side by side. In this clash, we won't hide. Two minds, one goal, to conquer time, to heal the soul. Defying time, we rise and fight. Breaking barriers, reaching heights. Aubrey and Peter, side by side. In this clash, we won't hide. In this war, our future's bright. Eternal dawn, we all unite.
Stardust blaze, the crowd ignites. Aubrey and Peter in the heights. Reverse a hump, the choice is near. In this clash, the future's clear. Eternal champions, rise and shine, breaking barriers, redefining time. Aubrey and Peter, face to face. In this duel, we find our place. Aubrey's quest to rewind age. Peter's going to hold the stage. flames ignite. A timeless dawn beyond the night.
Hi everyone. I'm glad to see everyone here in our open longevity debates with Peter Fedichev and Aubrey de Grey. Before we will start, I will tell a few words about open longevity. So, yeah, you can invite people here also, yeah, because everything's starting. We are streaming from San Francisco. This event organized by Open Longevity, which is non-profit focused on solve the aging problem for all people, all humanity, and we try to find specific solutions against aging that haven't been tested before. First of all, we support bold scientific research, but our main specialization is find like out-of-the-box solutions and including infrastructural solutions against aging. As Open Longevity, we support different databases and IT resources that help researchers to understand the nature of aging and one of I see that here most of the people come to this room, and I will one time more start. Aging data collection, and it is like another our solution, and we changes in representing of aging, what is the best solutions to solve aging, and today we will try new format. This is debates between scientists in the field. These particular debates are organized by Peter Fedichev, a professor of City University of Hong Kong, and he will present judges and speakers. So thank you, all of you, that you come here and connect with us, connect with Open Longevity, and we will find how to manage aging together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction. So I want to say that we don't know what aging is, and aging is probably one of the last pieces in biology that doesn't have a paradigm. If we ask different people in this room what is aging, they probably will give us different answers. And this is a unique situation for biology, where they formed like 50, 70 years ago. And today we need to look at aging with the eyes that people looked at infectious diseases before Pasteur's discovery of germ theory. And this type of look at this and that's why I think that we think that debates about high-end questions. Pleasure. To introduce the today's debaters. Easy job because they don't really need any introduction. So Dr. Aubrey de Grey, the president and chief scientific officer of Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation. With his work, he influenced a lot the way we think about aging and development of anti-aging therapies. And he will be debating with Dr. Peter Fedichev, who is a founder and CEO of Gero. His company applies physics to understand and cure aging. And I need to say that today's debate did not start yesterday and likely will not be finalized by this evening. We will have just one round of long-standing discussion on the general approaches and the possibility of the rejuvenation. And the moment will be decided by jury, and I'm delighted to introduce our juries for today. Dr. Dorota Skowronska-Krawczyk. Dorota, can you show?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Yes, Dorota is Associate Professor at the Department of Physiology and Biophysics and Ophthalmology at the member of the Center for Translation Vision Research at University of California Irvine School of Eye Diseases. No conflict of interest declared. Dr. Guo Huang. Guo, can you?
Hello, everyone.
Guo is an associate professor at Cardiovascular Research Institute at the University of California, San Francisco, here nearby. His lab research focuses on understanding the organ regenerative potential in evolution, development, and aging. No conflict of interest was declared. Now, Dr. Mattew Yozefzadeh. Matthew?
Hi.
Hi, Matthew is an assistant professor of medical sciences at the Center for Human Longevity and Center for Translational Immunology at Columbia University Medical Center. His lab utilizes in vitro and in vivo models of aging to explore roles of senescent cells, and in particular senescent immune cells, in driving organismal aging, and no conflict of interest was declared. Dr. Thomas Stoger. Thomas?
Welcome. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Was recently appointed as an assistant professor at the Division of Pulmonary Care at Patoshnak Longevity Institute, Northwestern in Chicago. His lab uses large data mining to pinpoint under-investigated areas of aging biology. You may have heard his recent result on the gene length-dependent transcription decline. No conflict of interest was declared. And last not least, the only 3D member of the jury, David Furman, the director of the Stanford 2000 Immunomes project at the Stanford Medical School, and he's also an associate professor and the director of the Bioinformatics Data Science Core at Buck. Dr. Furman lab leverages omics platforms and advanced AI/ML methodologies. His lab identifies biomarkers and integrative biological clocks essential for monitoring individual health. Notably, in 2022, NASA Human Research Program sought his collaboration, leading to partnership with SpaceX and Cornell. No conflict of interest was declared. So the question that we discussed today are formulated exactly. Question number 1. What should we do to get a person's life extended as soon as possible, and how do we prioritize directions in aging research? Question number 2, is it possible to rejuvenate the human body? These questions will be discussed following the procedure. Each question, so at first, each of debaters will make a short presentation, around 10 minutes long. Then this presentation will be evaluated by the jury. Each jury will distribute 4 score points between the debaters in any integral proportion. 4-0 if we have a clear leader, 3-1 is if one debater is stronger than the other, and 2 if there is a tie. Next, we will have a round of cross questions between debaters. Debater 1 will challenge debater 2 for 15 minutes, and then vice versa. Next, the juries will be asking their questions. It will take approximately 10 minutes per debater. And this round of questions will be again evaluated by the juries, who will distribute more 4 points according to same rules. So juries are, of course, welcome to take part in the discussions between debaters. Next, we will show the score, and then we will go to the next question and discuss it through the same procedure. So by the end of the debate, the total scores will be calculated, and the victor goes home with 10K prize. And now we are going to draw the debaters. So I don't have a fancy coin. Just yeah, you need to decide who will be for Washington, who will be for whatever.
Eagle.
Peter.
It's not my job.
Okay. So.
Aubrey for Washington.
Okay. Aubrey
Peter
for Washington. Peter for.
Crossing the Delaware.
Yeah. Okay.
Washington.
Washington. So Aubrey is first.
So I go first. All right.
Please.
Sure. Right. Okay. So
Yeah, please start your presentation.
yeah, I need to share my screen, right?
One
Just a
second.
moment. Rock and roll. All right. So it's a fairly distributed thing, so I'm going to stand up and do this. If I guess that's the best way to go. And I know that the camera here is broadcasting to the wider world. So, as you have heard, we are dividing this session into two parts, addressing two separate questions. And the first question is what you can see here, what we should do to get a person's life extended as soon as possible, and how do we prioritize this? And the second question is about whether rejuvenation is possible. Now, Peter and I have known each other for quite a long time, and we are both pretty expert in this area. So it will not surprise you to learn that actually on this question, we have very little to dispute. So this is not really going to be the focus of the debate. So, I mean, maybe one or two little things will come up. However, what I'm just going to do is to set out my position on this. And of course, I don't have very long. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to discuss the second question, which is going to be, I think, perhaps a little more interesting, because we definitely do have a difference of opinion there. So, yeah, this is the question to be discussed first. And let me make this work. Hello, hello, wait me a second. Come on. All right, let me go full screen. There we go. All right, so the question of what should we do divides into a lot of parts. And everybody who has been following this field for a while, and I know that most of the foresight community have been doing so, will be familiar with all of this. So I'm going to give a few updates. I'm going to leave the first one, research, until last. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about that right now. But let me talk about a few of the things that are going on already in the field right now with regard to the other aspects of what we should be doing, and with regard to, you know, what we could do even better than we currently are. So first of all, education. For the past 20 years that I've been, you know, prominent in this area, and people have been coming to me saying, you know, I'd like to help, how can I help? I have been doing my best to guide people into the most impactful ways that they can help, given their own particular circumstances and skill sets and so on. And, you know, I think I've done okay, but fact is, it doesn't scale when one person is the nexus of all of that. So one of the things that makes me most happy about what's happened in the past couple of years is the emergence of this thing, the Longevity Biotech Fellowship. This is a collaboration between two extremely important and influential people in the field, Mark Hammerline and Nathan Chang. Mark was one of my earliest protégés. Nathan came along a lot later. They're both Canadian, and Canadians have been really disproportionately represented among the longevity community since the dawn of time. These guys have got together and they have put together a way of bringing people into the field that does scale. They do retreats every few months around the world. They have an online program. It's fantastic. On top of that, there is something that I did initiate 15 years ago probably at Science Research Foundation, which is internships, where young scientists are taught about how they can apply their skills to the longevity world and also, of course, improving those skills. Greg Chin was my VP of education for many years, and I was able to relocate him into the Buck Institute up in Novato, where he's continuing to do great work. But, as I mentioned, I'm not only talking about what we're already doing. The goal of this part of the session tonight is to talk about what we should be doing more. And all I want to say really is that both of these things, whether it's internships, whether it's retreats, education of other kinds, we need to do these things at scale, at a bigger scale, every month. We need to be scaling it up. And at the end of the day, it's all about money, as usual. You know, the LBF, the Longevity Biotech Fellowship, are, you know, bumping along as best they can. You know, I'm very proud that I was able to seed fund them to get going, but, you know, they need a lot more. So this is a big deal, and definitely that's something that I feel needs to be prioritized. Then advocacy, essentially it's the same story. We have a number of new organizations, the Healthspan Action Coalition, which is led by a couple of extremely influential and well-respected people in this community, Bernie Siegel and Melissa King. Lifespan.io, which is an organization that I think most of you will be familiar with. It's been focusing on bringing information out there, essentially being a non-profit journalism organization mostly, but doing a bunch of other things, including bringing investors in through something called the Longevity Investor Network, a number of other things. It's a fantastic organization. Again, I was very happy to be able to help them through a financial crisis a year or two ago. So, you know, it's another really important organization. One of the biggest pieces of news of the past few months is the creation of the X Prize in longevity, which is, for marketing reasons, called the Healthspan X Prize, but in fact is it's got my fingerprints all over it, and I won't talk any more about that, but the fact is, you know, it's a rejuvenation prize, and I am extraordinarily happy that after about 15 years of discussions with Peter Diamandis, we managed to pull this off finally. And the last thing I want to mention is the Dublin Longevity Declaration, which is the single most important piece of advocacy that I believe has occurred in the past 12 months. In fact, probably in the past 5 years, to be honest. It is the first ever expression by the mainstream academic longevity community of major optimism in terms of the time frame for future progress. This is something that I've been doing my best to embarrass my colleagues into doing for many, many years, and finally we have made enough progress in labs all around the world that people are willing to sign up to a pretty aggressive declaration of what we need to do and what we should be able to do in the relatively foreseeable future. So all of these things are enormous pieces of progress in the recent past. But again, we have to ask, what are we going to do in the near future? That's the goal of this part of this session tonight. We're all about accelerating this. Every piece of progress we make should not be a reason to rest on our laurels. it should be a reason to motivate ourselves to work even harder to exponentially accelerate these things. And the last part of what I want to talk about tonight in this part of the session is the regulatory part. So we have a number of initiatives here in the US that I feel very happy about. Another organization that I was proud to be able to seed fund, the Alliance for Longevity Initiative, A4LI, is doing great things in the Beltway, in Congress, actually getting people who care about getting re-elected to believe that getting involved in the longevity crusade is there are votes in it, which is absolutely something that they did not believe until now. Many of you will know that in Montana there was a great piece of progress in terms of the entitlement to access unapproved medicines. This was something that A4LI drafted, and Ken Bogner, a state senator in Montana, was able to get through. Ken, in case any of you don't know, is standing for actual Congress, federal Congress, and the primary in Montana, which is really all that matters because Montana is a sufficiently non-swing state that if he gets through the primary, he's totally there. You know, that happens only a couple of weeks from now, so anyone who has any influence in Montana, please try to make that happen. And the most important thing that I want to emphasize in this part is the emergence of new jurisdictions, new entities, whether they be special economic zones in particular countries. That's what it normally is. Prospera is the big one. It's a special economic zone in Honduras, mostly located in an island called Roatan off Honduras, and it has very broad-based legal autonomy, and it is positioning itself to be very focused on biomedical opportunities in terms of encouraging companies to incorporate there, to relocate there, etc. It's going really well. I have spent a bit of time there myself in the past few months, and I think I am convinced that with high probability, Prospera will be the global center of medical tourism, especially for longevity, within the next couple of years. The sooner that happens, the better. The sooner that happens, the more lives will be saved. So I will simply conclude there, since I am told that I have only 53 seconds left, and tell you that these are the highlights, as far as I'm concerned, in this area. I don't really consider this to be the beginning of a debate, because I have a strong impression that Peter will say more or less the same things, but I wanted to highlight a variety of things just to set the stage. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Now it's Peter's turn.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for coming. Indeed, we have debates in two parts, and as you know, I tend to be technical. So I'll try to cut it in two and use this possibility to set the stage also for the second part of the discussion. So Aubrey has just told in great details how important are the normal things that we are discussing, like advocacy, of course, right? Political reforms, is aging as a disease, regulatory affairs, all the very important stuff. We're also discussing lack of funds, lack of talents, and these things are probably related to each other. At the same time, we have to think that over the last few years, I think everyone would agree that quite a lot of resources have came to the field. So I think if we ask ourselves what we should be doing, I think at least in part we should take our time to reflect a little bit on what have been done over the last years. And we've seen lots of interventions. We've seen some clinical trials. We've seen things that work or almost work in humans, which means that probably we have to reflect and try to correct maybe our trajectory. So instead of, let's say, thinking or talking about, let's say, high-level things like political and others, I will try to talk a little bit more on technical things. I think, so to the question that was asked, I think one of the most important answer is that other than doing all these advocacy things and everything else, we should actually to focus on trying to understand what is aging. I think, and that was in Dublin Declaration, I think written very well, that we were able to achieve quite some success with influencing aging without actually understanding this. So this is probably a double pact in our field, right? So people are so excited to see and try to translate from mice to humans and everything else. But I think many people would agree that we are haunted by many things with small effects that don't only are not only hard to reproduce from paper to paper, but also exceedingly hard to reproduce in clinical trials. So all these things together make me think that instead of trying different things all the time, expecting to find a better result, we should now reflect at what we have seen and try to develop a better understanding of what is aging, because I think that with the money that are coming right now into the field, we will have to answer eventually to people, where are the strong effects, right? And I think this is the problem. So why do I think so? Because if I look, let's say, back to the history of science and, let's say, extreme engineering, I always have a feeling that no matter how money you throw into that fields, like with cancer, right? People were throwing money a lot because there is a huge unmet need. If there is no revolutionary understanding, most of the time the field is stagnating. The same was with thermonuclear fusion, but everywhere where we had sufficient technical understanding what's going on, like Apollo program, like Manhattan program, we were able to achieve our goals within a few years. So I think that we should bring aging to the situation where we can set our goals with an error less than 10. And then I think with sufficient funds, we can achieve a lot. So aging is, in a way, in a much better situation than almost any other field that I have listed. Because, look, people who did nuclear bombs didn't see nuclear bombs. So they had to convince governments that you can make a nuclear bomb. In aging, we have animals that almost don't age, right? I mean, this is a huge inspirational example. We have seen, some of them are there. So we have seen animal studies that work, right? We have seen animals that were living longer. So it looks like we have now lots of tools. We have lots of data. Humans are the most studied animals on Earth right now. We have lots of data from humans. We have AI. Biotech is omnipotent. If you have a good biological idea, they can translate it into a medical solution. So how many minutes do we have? Just 5. Okay, so in what I will tell you now, I will try essentially to set the stage for the follow-up conversation. So let me briefly tell you what do we know about aging in mammals right away. So this is my short history of aging in mammals as I see it right now. So we have 3 most important mammals. Why? This guy lives in our houses. I'm kidding. So with this guy, we do preclinical trials, right? So if you want to make a drug, you have to study mice. This is me. So this is human. And this is our inspiration. This is naked mole rat. So why naked mole rat? The naked mole, well, in humans, as you know, our chances to die go up and double every 8 years. This is aging. This funny animal is the guy who has no signs of what is called demographic aging. Do you see the chances to die for this animal are kind of flat till the end of his life, unless you can measure, right? This is a mammal. And this guy has also exponential mortality. This is a mouse. So all these 3 things have to be understood within the same theory, as I said, if we really want to make something that will make that guy into that guy, or at least this guy into that guy. So once again, if you ask me what should we be doing other than advocacy and everything else, I think we have to understand what's going on. So once again, I will give just a very, very, very short idea how powerful the science and the data is there yet. I mean, the pictures are for intimidating purposes only. So look, if you have exponential disintegration of a living being, of course you start thinking about instability. So what is instability? One regulatory error produces more regulatory errors, and if you don't eliminate them in time, the number of regulatory errors goes up exponentially and you are dead. And believe me, that's what happens to this guy. This is mice. Whatever you measure there is exponential. The chances to die are exponential. These guys are just forming living a little bit and start disintegrating. So for us, they look like living beings, but in fact, they're explosions. They just explode in 2 years, okay? So as I said, if for some reason an error is eliminated before it produces more errors, right? Just a little bit better instructions to repair systems. Then you can have a situation where errors don't amplify. And then you can kind of live forever. So which means that your chances to die would be constant, and that's more or less what you see here, right? So basically linking longevity, extreme longevity, with simple ideas like physical or engineering ideas. We're engineers here. At the end of the day, we have to solve aging. Actually, is very useful. You can explain 2 different regimes. So now, once again, I need to answer to the question, what should we be doing right now to make humans live longer, right? So I have to put the human somewhere on the scale. And that's how I do it in all conferences, is that whatever you measure in humans, I've shown you that in humans we have exponential acceleration of mortality. But believe me, nothing in you changes exponentially as we age. Think about your face shape. If anything would be double, go up exponentially and double every 8 years, your face would explode in the last 40 years of life. This doesn't happen, right? So all our changes are very, very slow. But our chances to die are going up very fast. So that's what we need to figure out before we understand what to do with aging. So what happens in humans, and once again, humans are the best studied animals on Earth now, so you can have infinite amount of data on humans. What you can see is that humans are stable. We don't amplify errors. But at the time that is required to remove errors is actually going up as we age. That's aging in humans. Not the fluctuations of the biological age are killing us. We are controlling hallmarks of aging most of our life. You can literally kill a mouse on a high-fat diet. In 1 month, it will be dead. But you can go to McDonald's for 50 years. I mean, some body shape changes, but nothing really important. So humans are stable, but our stability is depleted as we age, and this is aging. So the relation between stability, loss of stability, and aging is something that we can study. We can study it now by combining these kind of high-level features with molecular-level features. So, for example, in DNA methylation, in proteomics, transcriptomics, we can cluster features. And in humans, and Andrei Tarhov is sitting there, who produced that graph. So you can see clusters of features that are going kind of linearly with age, with linearly increasing variance. And these guys are most probably stochastic and likely reversible. That's what we will be discussing next. And then these features accumulating. This is the wear and tear. This is really the damage. So the damage, it's measurable damage, so you can relate it to things that you can target. The damage can actually stress all other systems in your body to the point where they fail. And when they fail, you become a mice, and you're dead within 10 years. So you can study this both in humans and in mice. I'm just giving you the picture. What I'm trying to tell you here is that with lots of data and with a little bit of common sense and understanding, you will understand that in all living creatures, in mice and in humans, you can have 2 kinds of features: dynamic responses and damage, wear and tear. Damage accumulates and kills your ability to stress response. That's how you have 2 kinds of aging in your body and 2 kinds of anti-aging interventions. So those which are stress responses can be studied in mice. They can extend last 10 years of life in humans to the last 20 years of life, incremental change. And those who are wear and tear, who are this damage accumulation, these things will produce, if controlled, multiple-fold extension of human life. And that's what we have to demand from our friends biotech entrepreneurs. So I'm finishing with rereading my answer. To extend human life by a lot, and this is our goal. We have to agree. First, we have to work on theory of aging. We have to understand what aging is. Second, we want to focus our attention on things that can achieve strong effects. Otherwise, everyone will get frustrated and no money will be distributed in the field. And the last, we have to switch our trials to long-lived animals. Mice is really a disaster. We have to go to dogs. Kudos to Matt Chamberlain, by the way, and other people. Almost any other species is better than mice, and that's what we have to do our next trials.
Okay, that was great. So now, by our protocol, the jury should put the scores, and we are going into the question part. So first, George Washington.
Right, so...
oh, sorry, you have your own.
Yeah, we have the mics.
Is it on? Is it on? Yes. Okay, good. So, of course, one thing that just happened is that I chose to leave the research part of the question until the second half of the debate because we have so much to discuss there. Whereas Peter obviously chose to emphasize the research side. So we kind of don't have things to discuss right now.
We don't have a lot of disagreement on the first question.
Right. Nevertheless, let me try to manufacture a disagreement if I possibly can. Well, it's pretty hard actually. But honestly, I think that the key thing that we need to focus on is the question of which species should be prioritized. So Peter's position, and we will be discussing this more in the second part, is that mice are exceptionally bad as a model organism. And as we will hear shortly, I broadly agree with him on this. But at the same time, we have the question whether that problem might be outweighed by reasons that we should work on mice. So what's the main reason that we should work on mice? Essentially, it is history. What we have found in biology, not just in the biology of aging, but in biology generally, over the decades that people have been studying, is that the differences between different species translate into huge differences in the technical details of how to do an experiment that ever actually tells you anything. And so, across the whole of biology, people have well understood for a long time that they're not using the best species in an objective sense for their experiments. But the reason they're using the species they are using is because they can leverage all of the work that other people have done over prior decades to refine the techniques. It's not even just species, it's even at the level of cell culture. You know, people use particular cell lines because they're so well characterized that they know what's going to happen, and therefore they can ask the right question in an informative way. And as such, I believe personally that it remains valuable to continue using mice. And in fact, further than that, it remains valuable to continue using inbred strains of mice, which are fucked up beyond belief in terms of, one of my colleagues, Rich Miller, many years ago described them as mouse-like objects. They're not even mice. It's ridiculous to call them even mice. But the fact is, they are so well characterized that we can actually learn more in a shorter amount of time. We can learn, what we learn is unreliable, but if we start with, for example, mice that were caught 2 generations ago in a barn, then it's going to take us decades to actually learn even how to ask questions, let alone how to interpret the answers. So I think we do have to continue with this hybrid approach. Yes, using new species as best we can. Yes, using new strains as best we can, but equally also using established strains and species because the technologies, the techniques that we have developed in order to do so are so hard to develop de novo.
Should I reflect on this? Yes. Yeah, once again, to manufacture a disagreement, I would say the following. So I think if we have a good theoretical understanding what biologists are calling phenotypes, so which phenomena in mice are responsible for this and that kinds of aging, we can actually work even in mice. I mean, instead of measuring lifespan, we can measure other things and we can see how drugs can still work in mice. The only problem with this approach is that we still need to have some convincing to convince other people that these surrogate phenotypes that we can measure in mice are useful. So I think, yes, I mean, we in our company are also doing screening, we're working with mice because everyone can work with mice. It's a huge advantage. It's hard to get people working on dogs or on cats. I think what Aubrey is talking about is totally correct. I think we should establish how surrogate phenotypes, things that we can measure in mice, do translate to dogs, for example, and do extend life in dogs in ways that we haven't yet seen in mice. This has to be done by somebody. Maybe, by the way, by academia first. We know that in academia there are not so well supported now projects, and I think we should advocate to help this project supported. And if this is done, of course, then everyone else in biotechnology can still use mice, just measure the right things, and then hopefully get good drugs better. So I wouldn't argue with that.
One thing I would like to add with regard to other species, and which Peter reminded me of in his remarks just now, is the, well, let's just call it the incentive structure in academia. Simplistically, a lot of people are inclined to think, well, okay, there's the private sector, and the private sector is the private sector. Anyone who wants to make money wants to make it tomorrow, and therefore there is inherently going to be a bias in favor of short-termism in what is funded in the private sector. And the simplistic assumption is that academia picks up the slack, that it does the stuff that's going to take forever to turn into anything investable. And of course, to some extent, that's true. But what is overlooked in that interpretation is that academia has its own short-termism problems based on the it's imperative to get, publications in high-profile journals every 10 minutes. And thus, other things still get left behind by academia as well. And in terms of the discussion around different species, this has come to the fore particularly egregiously in the past couple of months, with the defunding of what I and many other people view as the very most important academically government-funded project on other species in the entire world, namely the dog aging project run by Matt Kaberlein out of the University of Washington. Everybody that I've spoken to has been completely horrified, just as horrified as I was, that this project was defunded by the National Institutes of Health. Christ only knows who was on the study section that made that decision, but it was just like, it was the most egregious example I can remember in the past decade of a failure of the government funding system to do what's best for its own field. It was just like, I'm completely lost for words. So this is the kind of thing that we, as a community, who actually care about this area and who are doing our best not to be bound by vested interests, this is what we have to address.
I would like to just interject for a moment to kind of feed a little bit this discussion and remind everybody that we set this question: what should we do to get a person's life extended as soon as possible, and how do we prioritize aging research? I heard about research and directions and private funding, but also advocacy, education, policymakers. I'm missing a very important part. I would love to hear from you. Today, the available diagnostics for aging biology and certain interventions are reserved for those who can pay. I would like to hear from you on thoughts. We talked about a person's life, not necessarily the richest of the rich. So just comments around how do we democratize biology of aging, diagnostics, and interventions. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. One aspect of that question that I find quite heartening is that insurance companies seem to be paying attention to the concept of prevention. They're not paying as much attention as I would like, but they're paying a hell of a lot more than they were even 5 or 10 years ago. They are understanding that it's in their financial interests, let alone humanitarian interests, to actually help people to not claim, you know, to not be sick enough to need their financial help. Because they're going to carry on paying the premiums, right? And, you know, people like that, people like the big health insurance companies, because they have the financial clout, they have the ability to lead by example. In other words, to give the rest of the economy, the rest of the society, the motivation and, if you like, the permission to think preventatively. We all know that it's all about prevention, that once you're actually already going downhill in terms of mental or physical function, once you're already sick, it's much harder to bring you back than what it is if you are just accumulating pre-symptomatic molecular and cellular damage. So to the extent that we can develop ways to monitor how far along you are on the path before you get sick, and thus to measure ways in which you can go backwards or at least slow down your progression along that path, you know, that's absolutely fundamental. Of course, we are seeing today a great deal of high-profile discussion around some new technologies to do this diagnosis, especially omic clocks of various types, epigenetic clocks being the main ones. I think everybody in this field who's reasonably informed understands that epigenetic clocks and other omic clocks still have some way to go to become as predictive as we would like them to be, and that, you know, maybe they'll never get to be as predictive as the more traditional things like, you know, grip strength and gait speed and blood and, you know, A1C measures and so on. But still, the point is, all of this revolves around the philosophy of prevention. And that philosophy is ostensibly in conflict, in tension with the financial incentives of big pharma who make their money out of sick people, but it doesn't need to be in that tension at all. It's only in that tension now because the public are fundamentally unconvinced by the philosophy of preventative medicine and thus will not pay for it. If the public were thinking preventatively as their main theme, their main mindset of health, then, you know, the regulatory structures that we have in this country and in other countries would follow suit, and the companies would follow suit too. They would follow the money. So it's all the public's fault. It's not really Big Pharma's fault, it's not really the FDA's fault, it's the public's fault. We need to educate the public to think more preventatively and everything will be fine.
We've heard education, and we go back to customers and the people out there. Peter, your thoughts?
Well, the first thought is that life is not fair. We know that even without these arguments, people of a higher social status live longer lives. And there is evidence statistically that these people, it's not like access to medicine, these people are healthier. And we also know that bad lifestyle affects people with lower social status more. So I mean, that's one part that should not be forgotten. So the other thing, I think that developing drugs and new medical technologies is very expensive and long, and many things get out from patent very quickly. Think about Ozempic that is now marketed to everyone. these guys, with my infinite respect to them, managed to discover the wonderful potential of this drug right at the end of the patent, which means that Ozempic will soon go off patent, which means that everybody can produce it and sell, which means, for me, it's very good. It tells me that it takes time to introduce a new drug. So extremely rich people will not try experimental medicines the next day they appear, right? So they will see some other people surviving this kind of treatment. So this gives a very interesting balance of time and power in this game. People in pharma will now have to compete with Ozempic to earn money because Ozempic is going to be generic. They will have to compete with their own creation, which is also very interesting. I think we can complain about this system a lot, but I think it's wise in many sense. This limited time of patent, for example, creates a situation that pharma will outcompete itself to produce a better drug, and the drug that has lots of post-market clinical trials will get to everyone at a price of I don't know how small. So it's not like I'm happy with this. I think our major concern at this time should not be how I'm going to sell that, maybe. Our major concern should be that it should work at least as good as Ozempic. Now we, as longevity community, may be competing with Ozempic as well, and that's not fun.
Thank you. So now it's turn to Peter to ask a question to Aubrey.
Yes.
Do you want to?
If I have to. Because that would be another manufacturing, well, I can try to manufacture disagreement. We agreed to disagree on the next part of the conversation. I'll say maybe to shift this conversation more towards the research, I think there is always, in every science, there is the balance between serendipity and kind of rational understanding and planning. And my feeling, since I'm not a biologist, that in biology people kind of rely, or at least they report that they rely on serendipity more. Like biology is complex, it's very hard to make theories, it's very hard to do plans. So can you reflect maybe on what I'm trying to argue? Should we be still trying to try as many things as possible in the hope to get something really strong? What is, in your view, where is the balance between how much we should go deep and how much we should go broad? I think that may be an interesting
that's
reflection.
an extremely good question. I think it is very tempting for biologists, especially biologists like me who came from a more mathematical discipline originally, to overestimate the power of rationality and to think, blind, blind screens of hundreds of thousands of chemicals are basically not the way to go. I guess I'm torn because I've never thought that chemicals of any sort, whether found by blind screens or by rational deduction, were the way to go. I've always felt that we need to go beyond pharmacology into cell therapies and gene therapies. And of course certainly with gene therapies, we have the advantage that DNA is digital. Now, we obviously don't understand how DNA translates into phenotype. There's a vast amount that we don't understand in what and how that translation happens. But still, the DNA itself is digital. Even the epigenome is digital. It's digital in a much more poorly understood way. So we kind of have a chance to be able to do high throughput screens at the level of the DNA. But I think that the insight that has driven my career over the past 24 years, namely the idea of focusing on the not just non-genetic, but the non-metabolic changes that happen throughout life, the accumulation of initially harmless, initially inert damage. That insight kind of factors out the question you're asking. It kind of means that we can look, in relative, not complete, but relative isolation at different changes, different molecular and cellular changes, and have a respectable hope of being able to address them individually without significant, unintended consequences that would be, translating elsewhere. I've always said that messing with metabolism, as I often call it, trying to manipulate this extraordinarily intricate network of processes that we have a ridiculously poor understanding of, is a mug's game. It's never going to work. There's just too much complexity and too much, evolved response. Too much pushback from the system. So I definitely still think that, and therefore I think that any drug screen is always going to be limited in its potential by that problem, by the fact that one way or another, metabolism is going to hit back.
Thank you. We have a question from the side of the jury, Dorota.
Hi. Thank you very much for your great presentations. I have a question for you. If you can tell what you think is and how your aging change started to work on it.
All right. So I find it quite frustrating that, and I did from the beginning when I got into this field, find it quite frustrating that there is so little consensus on what aging is. Because to me it was always obvious what aging is. And the definition of aging that I had back then is a definition that I have never, until this day, seen any reason to deviate from. Though I have found increasingly concise, perhaps succinct ways to express it. It is simply the accumulation of self-inflicted damage. And of course, in order for that definition to be meaningful, I have to say what I mean by the word damage. So I simply mean changes to the structure, the molecular and cellular structure of the body that, if you have too much of them, cause the body to work less well than it does in young adulthood. So that's all that aging is. It's the accumulation, self-inflicted, in other words, as a consequence of the body's normal operation of metabolism, the accumulation of changes to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of the body that the body is set up to tolerate only a certain amount of, and thus beyond which the body starts to exhibit functional decline. That's it.
Peter?
I'm looking for ways to disagree again. So maybe, first of all, I agree with the definition. Maybe I will add a little angle to that. So in all what I do and what my friends are doing, we try to keep let's say, we try to think about aging as the acceleration of chances to die as a function of age. I mean, this is not a great definition of aging, but at least it's mathematical and I can apply numbers to that. It doesn't tell you what is aging, but at least you can gauge any idea what is aging against this definition. So I would augment a little bit the definition by Aubrey. To me, aging is a damage. Aging is mostly self-inflicted damage. I agree with that. Damage is any difference from, let's say, useful non-pathological state. Too much damage kills you. I agree with all of that. But still, if I treat damage as deviation from useful state, there are lots of deviations from useful state. And I know that if you remove some kind of damage, quite some of those changes will go away themselves. So I would augment this definition a little bit. I'm looking for that part of the damage that is causative to acceleration of mortality. But I mean, it's kind of formal, but I think it's important.
Yep.
Thank you. We have one more question from the side of the jury. Matthew?
Thank you. Great discussion. So my question is regarding, you discussed regarding the sort of public uptake of geroscience, but what hasn't been touched on is the regulatory environment. For example, the FDA doesn't consider aging an endpoint. And then also, what are your feelings on the impact of the payers? So health insurance companies and everything that play a role in this.
Right, so I touched on that briefly in my remarks earlier on. I think that there has been very substantial progress in modernizing the regulatory side of this, but there's an enormously long way to go. The progress that has been made in the US comes in two parts. The first one being the FDA's approval of the TAME trial, which was a very big deal. That took an enormous amount of discussion with the FDA to identify the clinical endpoint that they were happy was sufficiently binary. They could say yes or no, right? But equally was sufficiently faithful to what gerontologists would view as actual aging. So it was very, very hard work, but it was done. And the fact that the TAME trial has not yet been funded is kind of secondary. You know, it's almost irrelevant. You know, the main thing is that the FDA said yes. The other thing is, well, I mentioned what happened in Montana with the right to try. It's very, very important change in regulation. However, even taking those two things into account and with the best possible, you know, gloss on them, I still feel that the US is not going to win this race. That what's actually going to happen is that new jurisdictions, such as Prospera in Honduras, are going to develop regulatory regimes that have all of the safety credentials that exist in traditional jurisdictions, but have none of the baggage, and therefore are able to move things from, you know, through the clinical phases many times faster, literally an order of magnitude faster than what happens in the West, in traditional jurisdictions. So that's where I see this going.
Yeah, I would like also, mostly amending what Aubrey is saying. I represent the biotechnology part of, let's say, of this large effort. And what I was surprised to learn over the last, let's say, couple of years is that I was kind of born into this field thinking that pharma is not interested in aging because aging is not a disease, blah, 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 and everything else. To my surprise, every big pharma company has an aging department right now. So they are super interested. If you talk to them, they know everything. They have read the last papers. They had a seminar of our paper with Andrei in Novartis discussed without us, by the way. So they are super interested. What's the problem then? They are not impressed. So to that scale, I mean, Novartis does 200 clinical trials per year, and unfortunately, the results that we're generating here as a community are not yet good enough for Novartis to start clinical trials. So basically, the message that they are sending to us is this, guys, don't talk how to sell that. Governments will buy. I mean, governments are suffering from aging. Governments will buy drugs against aging if there is a strong effect and trust that big companies will do that. So that's my take on that. We should focus on exceptional science. And I think there will be at least one big pharma company in 5 years doing a drug against aging if we do our work correctly.
Thank you so much. The last question from the jury, Guo.
I would like a quick question. Hopefully, you can have some full answers. And so given the discussion, should we anticipate the extension of our absolute lifespan, 200 to 300 years, or no extension of absolute lifespan, but increase in healthy life, for example, 80 to 100?
Well, I mean, most of the rest of this session will be dedicated to that question. But let me just say one thing, that, and I think here Peter and I will probably agree, is that the concept of compression of morbidity, or often called rectangularization of the survival curve, is not only a ridiculous goal in terms of biology, it's also a ridiculous goal in terms of humanity. We are making a huge mistake, and I will say, you know, a lot of my colleagues are making a huge mistake in tying their flag to the mast of compressing morbidity. Because what that basically says is that, yes, we would love to extend healthy lifespan, and we kind of don't want to think about the idea that that might have the side effect of extending total lifespan. In fact, we almost apologize for that side effect. You know, that disgusts me. Because the fact is, if you wake up tomorrow morning and you're healthy and vibrant and everything, then you're not going to want to not wake up the following morning. Period, right? It doesn't matter how many mornings ago you were born. It doesn't matter. What matters is your current state of health. And therefore, to suggest that how long ago you were born has some impact on how long you should live beyond the point that you stay healthy, it's just like, it's about as ageist as can be imagined. It's ridiculous. And yet, a lot of my colleagues, especially, I have to say, there's a huge concentration of this in my home country of the UK, a lot of people are willing to do this. And they think it's politically correct. They think it's going to help them get funding. I mean, what the fuck?
Peter, do you have something to add?
Well, as a foreigner, I'm not using English vocabulary as nice as Aubrey, so I'll have to use the words I was learning in my school dictionary, responding to that question. But nevertheless, yeah, I think healthspan is a terrible idea, because as we know, people who live up to 80, 90 years, they are reasonably healthy. They have much less diseases than other people. But if you look at their cognitive scores, if you look at their VO2 max, I mean, the quantities that actually inform you about everyday activities. I mean, these people cannot climb stairs, for example, quickly. So concentrating of having no diseases, like understanding aging as postponement of diseases and nothing else, is inviting the future that nobody wants. But by concentrating on the rectangulation of healthspan, we're actually working very hard to arrive at this wonderful situation, in quotes. So I do believe that we should focus on things that prevent this healthy aging. What is that? I should ask Aubrey next time. He will tell you what is that. Yes, we should stop age-dependent declines of physical function of the organism, and then trust me, people will live long if this happens as a side effect. Everything else is just invention of fake diseases to circumvent this idea that aging is not a disease. Let's find a disease. Let's try to cure a disease. This is a dead end in terms of development.
Correct answer. So, so the first round is over. So, dear jury, please. I understand you have hard time to evaluate the batons in this super peaceful discussion. So please try to do it.
Confuse everyone.
Yes. And David, is it done? No, now we want to say, can we? Yes. Can you tell this vote? Who is the yes, the sound. The sound. Aubrey with 7 points and Peter with 13.
made me feel like it's not the future that I wanted, by the way. And by the way, if rejuvenation were possible, I would be already marketing a vaccine against aging. It would be rich man, right? But instead, I'm telling you that rejuvenation is hard. Such a strange thing.
We can't stop aging, or we can stop aging?
No, we can stop, but we can rejuvenate just a little bit. We cannot strongly rejuvenate humans. Okay, when I say we can or we cannot, right? So it's important to make a time stamp on that, right? Because in infinite future, AGI in its infinite power for fun will be rejuvenating humans of arbitrary ages. There will be. But what's important, I think, I'm here in this field since 2015, so it's about 10 years. So I want to be sure that I will do something useful in another 10 years. So for me, when I'm saying that something is not possible, I'm not saying it's not possible in 100 years. So to me, this is a practical question, if it's possible within 5 years. Because add 10 years of drug development to that, add 15 years to your age, and if I'm right, that would be the age of your ground zero. Okay, so that's why I think discussing these points is important. Once again, I'm coming from the field where having bad theory is better than having no theory, because bad theory, first of all, informs about experiments where this theory can be challenged. And even if it's challenged, you would end up with a better theory. Another thing why theories are important is that in engineering and physical sciences, theories allow you not to do a lot of experiments. That's very important. Most of the ideas you can come out in physics are wrong, and you can establish it just by talking to your science supervisor. Right? So as I said, we want to put biology in a situation where we can skip doing most of the experiments. And then the hope is that we will be doing the most important experiments. And trust me, if somebody will prove that I'm wrong on the issue today, I will be happy. Okay? So now the things, as I said, will go ugly now. So look, I will tell you how I came to that conclusion. And we discussed it already a few times. Now we have single cell data, and I will really show you the guts of that thing. So how do I think about living organisms? So it's kind of simple. I have now, this is my metaphorical representation of 4 different cells. And 4 different cells here have all kinds of molecules that participate in its function. So what does the cell do? It takes energy from sugar or anything else, and then it chemically modifies the molecules. So if there is a stress coming onto a cell, then certain molecules are modified or expressed so that the cell responds to the stress. And then when the stress goes away, they go back, disappear, or get to normal stage, whatever. So in physical terms, what happens is that heat is transformed to work, and the work here is the activation or deactivation of pathways. And the heat cannot be transformed to work perfectly, so there will be always a little bit of heat that will be transformed to noise, and that noise will keep heating the molecules. And some of those molecules will get unwanted changes, chemical modification. And that's how this thing works. This moves up and down. These things get activated and deactivated, and all the other molecules are getting hits. So the more operations you do per second, the more hits you are getting on all kinds of molecules that are not involved in the process. Since it's hard to talk about molecules, let me talk about images, right? Just to give you the idea how these things work. So assume that now my molecules are represented by pixels, and this is a cell. So 5 means that the cell is doing heat shock, for example, and 1 means that the cell is doing DNA repair, right? And the same cell can switch off 5 and switch on 1, right? These things are the clusters of molecules that are doing the right thing. And then on top of that, the heat that is produced in expressing this thing is damaging the pixels here, right? So as time progresses, these are the time series, you see more and more molecules that are activated, deactivated in the wrong way. So if I do the typical clustering analysis, what bioinformaticians are doing in order to find things that are moving together, obviously they will find, you can establish one variable that clusters 1s and 5s, right? You can differentiate that very easily. But then there will be another cluster of features that is the background, and that background will go up with age, because this is my age here, and its average will go up linearly with age, and the variance will go up linearly with age. That's the picture that our reviewers are actually wanting from us, but we are not giving. That's exclusive for this place. They will have to crunch math, okay? So that's exactly what we see in DNA methylation signals in humans and in mice. If we cluster the features, the CpG's DNA methylation sites that are changing as we age, we will find at least one cluster that is linear with age, and its variance is also going up linearly with age. And then there will be other cluster of features that are bent non-linearly as we age. So this thing is linear, these are non-linear, and this thing is increasing in variance. So the same happens in mice. So don't believe that humans are bad or good. Mice are also good or bad. So if you cluster DNA methylation sites in the bulk DNA methylation in mice, you would also see one cluster of features that is going up exponentially, non-linearly, and another cluster of features that is just this kind of background. Okay, you would tell me that how do I know? I mean, I showed you these pictures. I show you that there is a cluster of features that is going up linearly and increasing in variance. And by the way, if you see a cluster of features that is going up linearly and increasing in variance, everyone who knows something about signal processing or statistics already starts to suspect that this is the product of uncorrelated noise, right? So if I just throw coins and compute the sum, if all the coins are fair, the sum would go up linearly and increase in variance with age, right? So this is very bad, because if the noise is uncorrelated, it's different in every cell, right? In every cell of your body, you have a different pattern of damage, and then you start thinking, okay, how can I ever come there with drugs now? So I have to have infinite control, infinitely precise measurements, and infinitely precise medicines in order to actually take it back. So how do I prove that, right? I mean, that was the evidence. And I got scared for the first time, right? So how do I prove now that this is really the uncorrelated damage? So you can only do it with single cell. So now, just last year, Atlas Lab produced single cell atlas for mice. And what we have done there is that we took all DNA methylation sites that are participating in the exponential motion and which are participating in the linear motion. So the sites that are changing with age exponentially and linearly. And what we have done, since we have now lots of cells now, and we can see how these sites are changing in each individual cell, what we have done there is that we computed what is called mutual information. We tried to find out how much information this particular site has about all the other sites. If there is a lot of mutual information, it means that this site is going together, is moving together with our other sites. If you measure this, you can also know what is the state of this, and that. So these are the pathways, right? So the clusters of features that are moving together. So what we've done here is that we sorted all these sites according to the mutual information. These are the sites that are changing independently, and these are the sites that are changing together with somebody. And the black bars are those which are participating in the exponential motion. So you can see that the sites that are participating in this exponential motion tend to operate together. This is the pathway. This is the stress response that goes astray and kills the mice. And those sites that are participating in linear motion are actually independent. They are mostly independent here. So this is a proof that the linear features in your DNA methylation are actually those that are produced by independent noise, totally different in every cell. So now, let's see how these things change in response to interventions. So this is parabiosis. Parabiosis works, we know. Young blood, old blood, I don't need to sell it here, right? I think many people know if you do that. So what happens is that if you measure this correlated feature, the pathway, young mice are younger than the old mice, right? So this is good. And then if you have old mice that were connected to young mice right after the experiment was finished, they're younger according to this measure. And this order of mice stays the same 2 months after the detachment, right? So this is rejuvenation. Remember, I told you maybe that if you're exponentially unstable, you can rejuvenate. I think it's important to have this picture here, is that if you have an exponential amplification of regulatory errors in your body, if somebody by magic would remove some of those errors, aging would not stop, errors would accumulate as we age, but now at a lower base, which means that if you do something that hits this correlated feature, then this correlated feature will be always below the control. So these are the actual experiments, the experiments that we do. So we have 2 groups of mice. We hit them with anti-aging treatment. So the treatment only worked here, and you can see that the treated group is always below the control. Very easy. If you're unstable, rejuvenation works like magic. Now the problem is with this part. So this part consists of uncorrelated changes, right? Uncorrelated changes means that you can have many different ways to have the same level of overall damage. In one cell, you have this pattern of damage. In that cell, you have that. So the total number of what is called microscopic states that correspond to your age is going up exponentially. This is called configurational entropy. The log of that thing is configurational entropy, which means that the linear features in biological signals measure configurational entropy. And the configurational entropy is something that doesn't like to get reduced, right? So if you mix liquids, you know that if you let the liquids mix, there is no way to unmix. It's better to flush them away and do the experiment one more time, right? So yeah, I'm sorry, just last slide. So that's what we tried now to check. The same parabiosis experiment, as I said, now we have two kinds of, we have this entropic measure of aging and we have the dynamic measure of aging. And remember, the dynamic measure responded and the result persisted till the end of life of this animals. Okay, for 2 months, but that's my prediction. So now, if you measure the entropy, the configurational entropy in this experiment, you would find that young animals are still younger than the old animals, which is good. But then parabiosis does nothing to the entropy of these animals. Well, actually, I believe that it increases it, but this has to be shown. So with this, I conclude is that, first of all, I must confess, I've been pitching to investors that you can rejuvenate humans, right? I rejuvenated a mouse. I was pitching that you can rejuvenate humans. Unless I've seen that. All age-dependent changes in humans and in mice can be separated into dynamic and entropic, and the dynamic changes can be reverted as much as you want. Most of age-related changes in humans are not dynamic, but are entropic, and the entropic changes are very hard to be reverted. Once again, I'm not promising you for 1,000 years, I believe, and I wouldn't bet on anyone. Well, if you ask somebody in physics about that, they say good luck to people that try to revert these kind of features. So that's my prediction.
Thank you. A little bit of overtime. Now it's time to Aubrey to set his position.
All right. I am not seeing the Zoom screen. Let me where the hell am I? I've got something is wrong. I think I may have to log out and in. I don't know how I got logged in the first place. Can you help me? What with the Zoom link? I have no. I was somehow automatically logged in, and now I am no longer logged in. Should I just go to the public link and found it? Wait a second. Subject. Okay, let me see what I get. Got it. Bang, no, that worked, Let me just now share my screen.
No, I got it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Try again. Good, that's better, that's much better.
because it's sad. Want to regenerate.
Good. Right.
Yes.
Right. All right, guys. This is going to get a little bit technical, but we'll see how it goes. So this is the question that we have been asked to debate. Is it possible to rejuvenate the body? And as Peter has emphasized, the real question, stated a little bit more precisely, is it possible to rejuvenate the body with reasonably foreseeable technology? In other words, in the next few decades, shall we say, as opposed to the next 1,000 years. So there we go. I don't know why I put that in there again, but I think it's probably worth mentioning that we have a statement by a number of very prominent gerontologists and of course a lot of other people, which Martin O'D and I inspired. Brian Kennedy wrote the main text of. It's a declaration that whatever we can do, we should be bloody trying harder than we currently are. So, in order to address the question, can we rejuvenate the human body? The place for me to start, which won't surprise you at all, is with the description of what aging is and the various ways in which we might theoretically go about addressing it, that I've been using for since the dawn of time. Essentially, that aging consists of the combination of two processes: a lifelong process whereby metabolism, in other words, the network of processes that keeps us alive from one day to the next, generates changes to the molecular and cellular structure of the body that accumulate over time. And I call those changes damage, precisely because I am interested in the changes that the body is set up to tolerate only a certain amount of. In other words, that eventually the body has enough of that the body doesn't work as well as it used to. And that's why the right-hand process happens. The generation of pathologies of late life, the changes in the reduction in physical and mental function that occur as a result of having more damage than what the body is set up to tolerate. And when people started to try to invent any kind of medicine whatsoever back in the 19th century, and they were rather successful against infectious diseases, the first thought was, well, let's try to attack the health problems of late life in the same way. And that's essentially what geriatric medicine is, trying to ignore the fact that late life health problems are late life health problems, and thus are very, very different from infections, and to just try to cure them. This has been spectacularly unsuccessful, though that has not stopped society from spending spectacular amounts of money on that. But about a century ago, a few people started to realize that this was a mug's game and was never going to work, and that's where the whole field of gerontology came from. The idea that we should be more preventative, insofar as our goal is to separate metabolism from pathology. In other words, to allow people to continue being alive, in other words, performing metabolism, without getting sick. Then we can't do it by separating damage from pathology. Maybe we can do it instead by separating metabolism from damage, and stop and making the body essentially run more cleanly. And that too has been spectacularly unsuccessful. We are still aging more or less as fast as we did a century ago. 20 or so years ago, I proposed that we should be looking at a completely different third option, which here I'm calling the maintenance approach, namely not to try to slow down either of the two processes that constitute aging, but rather to separate those two processes from each other by going in and repairing the various types of damage that the body is creating so that they never reach the level of abundance that causes the right-hand process to kick off. And that's all very well. So you all know all about that and the various things that I and others have been doing to implement that approach. But coming back to the question, the part of the question that was the first half of this debate today, what does that really mean? What it means is we need to repair a variety of different types of damage. We need to restore the structure and composition of the body in various ways to how it was in early adulthood. And my priorities over the years have been focused on doing things that other people are not doing. So I never worked on stem cell research to speak of, or tissue engineering. I never funded any of that work, simply because it was already fashionable when I came into the field. People were already doing it, and that was great. Other stuff that certainly I've helped with and that I have believed to be valuable has become fashionable over the years. Drugs that kill off senescent cells, parabiosis, which Peter already mentioned, which has matured into discussions of plasma exchange, where we don't exchange the whole blood, only the non-cellular component. Overexpression telomerase has been terribly fashionable over the years, and there's certain evidence that, at least in some species, it might be valuable. And of course, the biggest one of all, which is drugs that trick the body into thinking that it's in a famine, that it's not getting as many calories as it would like. So that's calorie restriction mimetics. This is a space that was really pioneered largely by David Sinclair around the same time that I pioneered the idea of damage repair. And of course, CR mimetics are now a very big deal. But there are things that still remain under-addressed, undervalued, I would say. And one key thing is combination therapies. The whole idea of damage repair revolves around the idea that we need to characterize what the damage is. And of course, there are many, many different types of damage, and then address these types of damage directly, which means that by more or less by definition, we're going to have to do a lot of different things to the same people at the same time. Even if we want to do it with mice, you have to do a lot of things to the same mice at the same time. And it's taken forever to get people to really accept that that's the right thing to do. But it's not actually true that people were reluctant to accept it. It's just they didn't want to say they accepted it because it's not the kind of thing that gets you, you know, high-profile publications and promotions and tenure and grants and so on. So it's counter to the academic incentive structure. And that's appalling. What's even more appalling is that damage repair is all about intervening late, when the organism that you're trying to rejuvenate, trying to help, is already in middle age before you begin. There has been an enormous reluctance to go that way, despite an enormous incentive to do so, ostensibly, simply arising from the fact that it's easier to get conspicuous, you know, high-profile results if you start late, which is the worst reason possible, because the fact is, kids don't pay taxes. It doesn't actually, it's not what we should be doing. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've listed here that's still just, it's really difficult, and therefore it's pre-investable, that's fine. But the reason why LEV Foundation is now focused on combination late onset rejuvenation is because nobody else is in a position to do it. It's just antithetical to the incentive structures. So the reason I mention all that now is because it sets the stage for the thing that really is a difference of opinion between Peter and myself. And in order to introduce that, I need to start here. So here's my definition of aging. These two processes: metabolism causes damage throughout life, even starting before we're born. And then late in life, after we've accumulated a lot of damage, we start to get sick. Now, one thing that Peter mentioned, and which I completely agree with, is that mice are a poor species in terms of being typical of mammals, simply because they get the right-hand process starting very early in life. There are some pretty nice pieces of evidence of this, actually, especially in relation to cancer. So basically what Peter is reporting, and which it doesn't surprise me at all, and I agree with it, is that mice end up getting sick early. And that is quite important in terms of the trajectory of what happens. I'm never going to get that in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Just don't even think about it. So the trajectory, because the trajectory is driven by feedback. Positive feedback loops are critical in biology in general. And I just want to summarize in very abbreviated sense what's going on here. The rate at which metabolism generates damage is hugely dependent on how much pathology is already present. That's why the arrow that I'm drawing from pathology back to metabolism is a big, thick arrow. There is some feedback from damage back to metabolism, but it's very, very, very weak. Hardly anything, really. We can almost forget that feedback exists at all. And that really underpins the dynamics that Peter has been reporting. So, what does that mean in terms of the feasibility of intervention? Well, what Peter has been saying, and again, here is something we agree, is that there are 2 types of damage that we need to be partitioning, we need to be addressing. They can be, I'm going to call them here, defined versus undefined at the chemical level. So what that means is something that can be distinguished as damage versus not damage by an enzyme, for example, right? So something that can be defined as damage is something that you don't see in young adults and you do see in older adults. Waste products, like accumulation of amyloid, for example. Cross-links, chemical bonds between proteins in the extracellular matrix. Loss of cells, just having fewer stem cells of a particular type, things like that. But self-senescence, having more cells that have certain markers on their cell surface that say that this is a bad cell. Whereas mutations and epimutations, which means random changes to the epigenetic state, the methylation state, etc., these are chemically undefined, undetectable. They look the same because it's all about simply the sequence rather than anything that's any abundance aspect. So Peter and I agree that damage of the first type, what I'm calling the defined damage, can be removed. Sometimes it's rather difficult to remove it, no question. That's why I've worked on it a lot. But it can, in principle, be removed. But Peter's suggestion is that undefined damage can be thought of as, let's call it informatic damage. Thermodynamic damage is a word that Peter's used for this. And the question is, can that be removed? Now, we know that it can be removed if you've got some kind of oracle, some kind of external source of information that says, this is damage, this is not damage, right? But we don't have that oracle. And certainly we don't have a way to communicate that oracle to cells. So that sounds really hard. That sounds like, we'd need something else. Now, there are end runs around this in certain cases. One case is the mitochondrial DNA. So we know that mitochondria accumulate mutations, and those mutations cannot be removed just by saying, okay, we don't like this sequence. Yeah, I know. I'm going to take another couple of but we can look at the way that mitochondria behave. And we can perhaps potentially get rid of them by selecting on that. So that's one thing that we've been exploring. We can also do the same things in some cases for nuclear mutations, especially if they become cancerous. But the really big deal is nuclear epimutations, which is where Peter is focused. So this is what we need to worry about. What I'm calling, hang on, there you go. What I'm going to call informatic redundancy. So what Peter is focusing on is that as damage happens to the epigenome, the identity of a cell, the ability of a cell to know what kind of cell it is and what it should be doing, degrades in the same way that the quality of an image might degrade. So the right-hand image here is the same as the left-hand one, except that a lot of the pixels in the right-hand image have been randomized. So you can still see what it is, but less distinctly than before. So what does this mean? Well, I say that we might be able to use this informatic redundancy that I'm calling. But what do I mean by redundancy? Here's what I mean. Every single aspect of how the cell knows what it is stored at multiple levels in a kind of holographic way across the epigenome. Different loci being adding up to the state of the cell. So if we start with a cell that's the ultimate, the fertilized egg, the ultimate totipotent stem cell, that's the top one there, the box at the top right. There's a programmed process that turns each cell into a differentiated cell. That's the second one there. So that's step one. Now, step two is where I just showed you, where the epimutations happen and it becomes randomized. The question then is, what does dedifferentiation do? We have this thing called, induced pluripotency, which is being used a lot. I will be done in 52 seconds. We have this thing called OKSM, these 4 Yamanaka factors, which are able to stemify cells. And that is process 3 over here. Now, if you look at picture number 4, the second one from the bottom, you will see it's no more distinct than the picture above it. And furthermore, it's darker, which means it's more stem-like, right? That's how I'm demonstrating it. So that sounds like no progress at all. But then, after that, the differentiation process kicks in. The same process 1 that went from the totipotent cell to the differentiated cell can kick in. And it knows what to do because there's still some signal. So step 4 is the key. You end up with a signal that's almost indistinguishable from the state that it was in young adulthood, simply because there's some signal to go from. And so you end up with bona fide rejuvenation without an oracle. Now, the question is that real, or is that just me making it up? And the answer is, well, we don't know, but a recent publication from the Schumacher lab indicates that it very well might be. It's tentative, but they showed that purely random behavior can mimic dedifferentiation and partial reprogramming. So I think the things are moving in my direction, but I want to say in conclusion that we don't know yet. That my gut feeling is that Peter's wrong, that in fact the amount of rejuvenation that we can do without an oracle is much greater than it might seem, and that the only reason it's not happening spontaneously is because we don't apply OKSM, but I could be wrong. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Quite some overtime, but now finally we go to the cross question, and the first question comes from Peter to Aubrey.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Aubrey, for nice summing up, including what we have discussed in great language. If you let me, I will reflect specifically on some things. So first, you suggested that mice, correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, because I think it may be important. So you suggested that in mice, there is possibly a very strong positive feedback loop between pathology and metabolism.
Well, I would say that in all animals, there is a feedback.
Yeah, but
what's different with mice is that pathology emerges at a younger age than it does.
So I think I share your intuition, because whenever I'm saying that mice are unstable, in other language, it means that it has very strong positive feedback loop, right? So I'm just reporting to you that I'm very close on that. So I believe that humans have less of that most of the time, and this feedback loop increases dramatically late in life.
Well, so I would say that pathology emerges later in life.
Yes.
So once pathology does emerge, whether it's early or late, then the positive feedback kicks in.
Yeah.
It's just that in mice it emerges unusually early, whereas in other species it emerges relatively late.
Right. It's always nice to agree. Then I like your definition that we have. Indeed, we're discussing defined and undefined damage. I think we totally agree
Chemically.
Chemically
detectable.
Yeah, detectable, defined. I think it's a very good definition because we are evolutionary sophisticated species, meaning that we have, most of the time, we have options to remove a lot of defined damage. We may not use them for whatever reasons, but the options exist, right? And then you nicely put it that there is a certain kind of damage that is not very well defined, right? So
not chemically detectable.
Yeah, or it's not. It could be detectable, but there can be no route to fix it.
No enzymatic route.
Sorry?
No enzymatic route.
Yes, no, I mean, no enzymatic route, right? So, for example, there could be a large piece of DNA extinguished, or there may be a retro element placed somewhere in between inside your DNA, and this is clearly a damage that is very hard to think that somebody can take out, right? So, yes, indeed, that there is a certain kind of damage that can only accumulate, kind of only grow one direction. And then everything depends if our body can recognize these cells or future interventions can recognize these cells as somehow strange, and if we can allow for targeted removal of that cells. I wanted to add this direction in our discussion because you said that I am focusing on epigenetic alterations. Yes, what I have demonstrated was the example with epigenetics, but I think, like often in biology, it's not because we should be focusing on epigenetics. It's because only epigenetic signals exist in sufficient quality in single cells, and that's why we can have a look at that. So I think if somebody provided us with the positions of these jumping retro elements, for example, we would also have a lot of fun detecting linear signatures with Poissonian properties, right? So I just wanted to make sure that what I'm telling is not focused to epi mutations, right? What I'm trying to present is a kind of statistical physics of this kind of undefined damage, right? So moreover, it could be that in some species, this is mostly epi mutations. In some species, it could be mostly retro elements. So in fact, we have too many ways to produce this defined damage, right? So then what you suggested here is that with specific technology or specific natural process inducing pluripotency, we can maybe take out some of epigenetic noise. So I like this example with the pictures that you are providing. I think we are now discussing a situation which is in some unknown realm, right? So, for example, when I presented data on parabiosis, I know that it's that way. But when we're now discussing your hypothetical situation, we cannot say which way is that, right? So my first argument would be, and then it would then translate to a question. So if we are talking about this, for example, jumping retro elements as other sources of this undefined damage, even if this OSKM magic works, that part will not be removed. So maybe we will have a substantially slower rate of accumulation of this undefined damage, but it's not yet complete. I mean, we can take a lot of damage once, right? Kind of reduce the baseline with the technology you are suggesting, but at the end of the day, we still will accumulate damage due to other factors. And we have no way to know at this time in humans which is the most important part of this undefined damage. There is a paper recently suggesting that epigenetic switches, epigenetic changes tend to accumulate at the places of somatic mutations, for example. And we also have now a few recent papers suggesting that the rate of somatic mutations is inversely proportional to lifespan in species. Surprise, right? So I think we should keep this discussion a little bit broader, because I think there is a direct evidence that epigenetic modulations may not be the end. Or, I mean, there is no evidence that this is even the largest part of the story. Would you agree with that?
More or less. I mean, I think I want to answer in two ways.
Close.
first way is that we definitely need to take into account protagonistic pleiotropy. In other words, the concept that genetic or epigenetic damage can cause multiple different types of problem, and one of those problems is cancer. And that cancer is by far the problem that matters most in terms of lifespan, healthspan and lifespan.
Exactly.
Hence, that evolved DNA repair and maintenance machinery has been selected to be as good as it is because of the need to not die of cancer before you have reproduced. Hence, that is, quote, unnecessarily good for everything else. So that's one thing that we totally need to take into account. That again applies across mutations, epimutations, whatever kind of mutation, whether it's retrotransposons or anything. The other thing to bear in mind here is partial reprogramming just works. You know, it just does. So this kind of gives us a baseline on what the proportions are for human cells with regard to the relative influence of epimutations versus mutations. Because as you say, differentiation only affects the epigenome, not the genome, and therefore, to the extent that it works at all, it must be telling us that the epigenome is what matters.
Can I?
Sure.
Can I reflect now on this? We discussed it, but I think it's worth to state. Well, first of all, we have some experimental evidence right now when OSKM factors or OKSM factors were used in vivo, in C. elegans, in flies, and in mice. But okay, let's forget all the other guys. Let's think about mice. So my picture, if I look at the analogy that you have with this flower picture, so for me, the picture is a little bit more complicated. So it's not just a still flower. So what the system does, it always expresses different patterns. So for me, it's like an animal that has, you know, the skin patterns changing all the time. And this is a totally mixed up situation. So some patterns are not pathological at all, right? So some of them are stress responses. We are thinking now, and we have lots of these patterns activated, deactivated. And on top of that, we have random damage. So in my view, for the technology like you're suggesting to work, we need somehow to quench the cell, to make it stop doing as much as it is doing, right? To make it as static as possible, and then try to denoise it, right? Because if you would try to denoise on top of a noisy operational system, I'm sure that you would only increase entropy in the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't think that that's a major source of concern, because the changes that a cell makes to its epigenetic state, to its gene expression pattern in response to signals, let's say stress, but signals in general, and that are reverted when the signal goes away, those are not noise. Those are not noise at all. And therefore, we should not expect that imposing dedifferentiation, a stem-like influence on the cells should work any less well when a cell is under stress, when it's doing things, than when it is under a different state.
Right. We are once again discussing something in the realm of unknown. So obviously these are the speculations, but I think the experimental fact that is present right now is that if you try to do OKSM too much in vivo.
Oh, too much, right.
Yeah, but I mean, too much. Well, first, if you try to do it more and more, you max out the effect on lifespan pretty quickly.
Of course you do, because then you're losing signal.
Yeah,
too much signal.
Yeah, too much signal. And the effect where the maximum effect that occurs in mice is not larger than anything else that we have seen with caloric restriction, right? So it's just the same as everything else. So to me, I mean, that's the fact. So I will try to provide the interpretation, and you please reflect on that. So for me, it looks like this. So what I see here is that yes, we have some pathological activity patterns as mice age. And when we apply OKSM factors, these activity patterns are reduced, right? We know frailty index, lifespan increases, markers of all sorts of factors that are expressed alongside with aging are reduced. So to me, it says that what OKSM is doing is not only increasing stemness, but it's also quenching the gene expression normal gene expression patterns. And I think it's very hard to distinguish now when we see this effect in mice, life-extending effects by OKSM. I definitely see that the inflammation is going down, right? So OKSM factors reduce inflammation. They switch off expression of proteins that are related to inflammation. Whether it is due to the increased stemness or whether it is just because they affect all translation machinery in the cell, I don't know. So my question is this: when I apply them a little bit, I see that all gene expression patterns are normalized. But when I apply too much, I kill the animal. If I apply them to C. elegans, I kill the animal even without any positive effect on lifespan. To me, it says that there is a very narrow range where this intervention looks like any other intervention against hallmarks of aging. And once you go over that, you start killing the animal. And then my question is, how much is it better than anything else that we have?
Yeah, all right. So, yeah, I think the answer to that is quite straightforward. First of all, we absolutely expect that going too far with dedifferentiation will kill the animal, because the animal depends on cellular identity. And when we are doing dedifferentiation, we are partially removing information that defines cellular identity. So we have to, do it and then let the cell recover, if you like, let the cell identify what's wrong, identify what's still too stem-like, and fix up the rest of the CPG sites or the histones or whatever. However, the additional thing that, in terms of if we look at the organism, that we have to bear in mind is that the experiments that have been done so far, at least the ones that have been published, have all been revolving around doing partial reprogramming on its own with nothing else. So, of course, if all of the damage that you and I agree is relatively easy to fix, the non-genetic damage, the waste products and so on, if that's being left just sitting there, then of course we're not going to expect to see significant increases. What's going to be much more exciting is when we do what I want to do for my next combination experiment, which is to do partial reprogramming at the same time as doing a whole bunch of damage repair of the non-genetic types. And then we can actually ask the question that you're very rightly asking.
We have 1.5 minutes. Probably we can switch, and now Aubrey can challenge Peter.
Well, what do I have left? I mean, honestly, Peter, you've made a very thorough exposition of your perspective, and I think where we have been able to show to the audience that we agree is that more data are needed, that there are certain key experiments that we need to do. I just highlighted one of them, namely combining partial reprogramming with a whole bunch of interventions against other types of damage. But at this point, I would like to ask you this. If we were able to do some interventions against informatic damage, thermodynamic damage, what would those interventions be, and how well do you think they would work?
I think to me, it's almost a circular question. So if you can do, as I said,
so
yeah, we can.
Yes,
we can. Imagine, I'll say it's hard to actually trying, but I think we can think about situations where when cell chromatin is so much damaged that they start to express whatever factors that are never expressed normally, embryonic factors or something like that, for example. And then in these cases, maybe we can train immune system to actually eliminate these cells. So obviously, these extreme entropic situations, edge cases will be removed. and that will translate into the reduction of the rate of aging.
Yeah, so that's similar to just removing senescent cells or removing cancer cells.
Yes, but now specifically
cells that have a phenotype, a detectable phenotype.
Yeah, if.
But earlier you and I were discussing the idea that certain people have somehow a lower temperature.
Yes.
So that's what I wanted you to elaborate on.
Yes, that's one of the ideas that that we're thinking about. So if aging indeed is the infinite number of uncorrelated processes, that means by the way, two things. That first, if you come with a drug, with almost any drug has 50% probability to be good for a specific process and 50% probability to be better for a specific process. If aging is infinite number of processes, it means that the net effect is zero by central limiting theorem. So that's why it's very hard to affect rate of aging. Whatever you are doing, as I think we know, right? Even smoking does not affect the rate of aging, as we know. Social status affects in a funny way. So but back to the question, you have to find something that would be similar and important for all infinite amount of uncorrelated processes. Can that be in principle? In principle, yes, because as we know, all configurational transitions between different states of molecules would not occur at absolute zero when everything is frozen, right? So the more fluctuations you have in the system, the more transitions you have in the system. And normally the transition rate depends on noise, on the temperature in a very harsh way. One example is glass, right? When the glass is hot, you can do whatever you want with that. But then if the glass is cooled, suddenly it becomes solid-like. It's not solid, by the way. It still flows. But the viscosity is such that when you change the temperature by a few degrees, the viscosity can shoot up a few orders of magnitude. So I think that's exactly what happened between humans and naked mole rats. So humans, naked mole rats were able to reduce the noise in their cells in such a way that with less noise, they do less configurational transitions between molecules per unit time. And since, as I said, this transition is not linear, a little bit of noise removed can be translated to a dramatic reduction in the rate of aging. So I think when I'm saying that I don't trust into rejuvenation, it's not like I want to stand up and do something else, train large language models or something like that. No, I mean, for AGI to solve aging, no. What I'm saying is that if we're thinking about technologies that can be applied right now, I mean, started to be tested right now, with the hope to get a drug in 10 years, I think we should focus on those things that reduce noise in biological systems, in the hope that if we do it correctly, that will reduce the rate of all those transitions in the same time. So that's why I think Hayflick told once that aging may be not a problem of biology, but is a problem of physics. Physics is just is an interesting science that sometimes has this school of thinking, what is the last common factor behind infinite number of uncorrelated events? So I believe that this field is now exploding. Multiple papers are appearing. People start thinking about that. I think in 5 years we'll have lots of works where biological noise is studied and its effect on aging revealed. And I will be one of the first there.
Sure. Yeah, actually, I was the one who said that aging is a problem of physics, not biology.
Okay, I'm sorry. I will cite you next time. I wrote a paper.
But of course, the point here is very much what we've been discussing tonight, that where we're starting from, as something we absolutely agree on, is that aging is a function of the structure of the body, because the body is a machine. And therefore, its function is defined by its structure.
All right, I'd like to interject and ask a question to both of you. And that is, try to remind everybody the original question that was posed here. Can we rejuvenate the body? Okay, and I don't think there's been an answer yet. And one thing I really want to emphasize that we do know at the molecular level, things can be rejuvenated, quote unquote. Biological aging clocks can be reversed. At the cellular level, maybe that's also true. But then as we're growing complexity, tissues, organs, fibrotic tissue, wrinkles, we've seen from partial reprogramming that mice do better that the fibrotic response improves, but can we bring it back in time? Can we rejuvenate the body? Go back to that question.
So I think the best way to answer that question directly is to dissect what we mean by the word rejuvenation. To say, okay, yes, absolutely, we can repair some aspect, we can restore some aspects of the structure and function and composition of the body to what it's like in early adulthood. That is rejuvenation. So the real question is, can we comprehensively rejuvenate the body? Are there some aspects of those changes to the structure and composition of the body that happen over time as a side effect of normal metabolism that cannot be repaired, reversed, with foreseeable technology? That's the debate that Peter and I have been having tonight. And so my belief is that the amount of informatic redundancy that exists in the epigenome and in the genome, for that matter, is sufficient that for the foreseeable future, yes, we can comprehensively rejuvenate the body. I have always highlighted, even since 20 years ago, since way before Peter started doing his important work, that there will be a limit to what we can do just by fixing the 7 deadly things that I've been talking about all this time, and that eventually mutations and epimutations will catch up with us, and therefore eventually we're going to need more sophisticated rejuvenation technologies. But my contention has always been that that's not going to happen until we are many times older than we can currently reach, so many hundreds of years old. Peter's contention, as I understand it, is that in fact that limit is going to hit us within as little as 10 or 20 years beyond where we can already get. In other words, we can only get 10 or 20 years from the chemically detectable aspects of rejuvenation. So I believe, actually, no, we can probably get hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, well, maybe, well, first of all, it's a great answer. And maybe I should make kind of legal statement, because to increase disagreement, right, because this is a debate, right, so we have to take kind of extreme positions. But yes, I think it's very nice to put it. I think we have enough experience with rejuvenation, every one of us, right? So we know that people who are sick or tired, they look older, right? When you sleep over, you look younger. If you go to a gym for a few months, you start looking younger. But if you stop going, you start looking back the same, right? So there is a certain range of physical appearance and functional performance that can be moved back and forth for as long as you're alive, almost, right? So within this limit, I think rejuvenation is possible with, as Aubrey put it correctly, with chemically identifiable damage. And I believe that all pharma and longevity industry right now is specifically going after different ways to reduce this chemically identifiable damage, because it fits well to the drug discovery paradigm. So that's why I think we will be living in 10 years in the world of Ozempics. There will be Ozempics for fat, Ozempics for muscles, and everything else, right? So we will possibly extend this 10 years into 15 years. But as I said, VO2 max is going down, cognitive scores are going down. Most of these things are not affected with these kind of interventions, which means that there is a limit, as Aubrey is saying, with chemically identifiable damage. And in order to stop progression, in order to alleviate humanity from aging, we should start thinking about things that are reducing chemically identifiable damage. And I believe what I'm preaching here is that for the 10 years to come, we will not have a good way. I mean, that's my position. It's not like we're discussing that we will not have a good way to do that. And the only way is to prevent. So you can prevent the growth of entropy. That's allowed in the physical textbook. And it's very hard to do, to struggle against the second law is the last thing that you want to do. So I think we mostly agree, and I would be happy to get wrong on that. I want minus 30 years. Don't get me wrong.
Thank you. So questions from the jury. Thomas?
My question was a little bit similar. Both refer to recent studies on epigenetic clocks that were trained on stochastic change, but also like one of them also showed that the rejuvenation is only partial. So I was kind of like curious whether you think that it's because the current rejuvenation approaches aren't sufficient, or if there's something to the stochastic component, or if there's something else, like why it's not going all the way back.
This is a question to both, or to Peter specifically?
Particularly to Aubrey.
So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, Thomas. Are you saying that this study that you're talking about showed only partial rejuvenation, and therefore there's some kind of indication that there is some aspect of epigenetic aging that is somehow impervious to epigenetic to partial reprogramming? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe. I'm also curious. I mean, I'm not sure if there's an answer that already exists.
Okay. Well, I would say that at this point we definitely cannot have any confidence that we know how to do partial reprogramming right. At the moment, we're still in the early stages of this. It's only a decade ago that Yamanaka even came up with his way of doing things. Well, it's nearly 2 decades now, I guess. So we're still learning a lot about how to apply the genes that do the evolved thing in the fertilized egg to cells that are very different from a fertilized egg. We've even since a few years after Yamanaka, we had, for example, Jean-Marc Lemaitre showing that if you added nanoorganellin 28 to the cocktail, then you could get more thorough de-differentiation of senescent cells, for example. That was just the first step. Many other people have been, exploring variations on the theme. So I think we have to conclude that at this point, we are likely to have some way to go to get to perfect de-differentiation, however partial we choose to do it, however partially we choose to do it for particular purposes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Dorota.
Hi, this is very interesting discussion. I have actually question to both of you. You both are talking about rejuvenation and Yamanaka factors as a potential one of the mechanisms to
Oh my God.
Can you hear
Dorota,
me?
you got frozen in the middle of the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course. So you're both talking about the Yamanaka factors, and I am also very much interested in it. However, I find it really interesting that nobody really looks for what they actually do on molecular level. And so how comfortable you feel, talking about the next levels and adding something to Yamanaka factors if you don't really know what they are doing. And this is really puzzling for me in the field of aging altogether, because nobody asks that question. So would you mind commenting on it?
Sure, I'm all over that. I completely agree with you. And if you come to Dublin 3 weeks from now to the conference I'm running, you will be suitably pleased, because one of the speakers will be describing exactly addressing that, figuring out the molecular specifics, the structural basis of de-differentiation by the Yamanaka factors, and indeed showing results that if one makes very well thought out changes to the amino acid sequence in active sites, one can greatly, I mean really greatly improve the efficiency of de-differentiation. So you're absolutely right. This is a high profile area, not nearly enough people are working on it, and a high priority area is what I meant. Not nearly enough people are working on it, and at least there's some progress now.
Mm-hmm. So now maybe in the genre of manufactured disagreement, I would comment the following. So So you have heard my position. So I do believe that we should be focusing on something else, like stopping aging rather than trying to rejuvenate. But other than that, what strikes me a little bit with Yamanaka factors is that yes, they have just came out 10 years, and they are already the last resort of our aging field. So for me, that's scary. I mean, what would happen if that discovery wouldn't be done? So that's why I think in this discussion, I'm always framing myself to the discussion what we can do. I mean, to achieve something in 10 years, we have to be doing something right now already. If the level of understanding of Yamanaka factor is not sufficient right now, I mean, either we would be extremely lucky, maybe Yamanaka factors were sent by aliens to us together with Bitcoin, I don't know. But if not, I don't want this to be our last resort.
I'm with, yeah, and I want to manufacture a disagreement here myself. For me, you know, I've been looking at this field for the past 24 years since I first formulated this, you know, classification of types of damage. And I have been extremely heartened, not only by the fact that that classification has stood the test of time, but also by the fact that each of the various ways in which I proposed we could address these types of damage have been augmented with alternative approaches. So, for example, you know, back the 7 deadly things predated Yamanaka, and back then I was looking for exactly the same thing, you know, how to create autologous stem cells of different types. But we did have a solution back then. It was just that it involved really laborious things like nuclear transfer and you know, development through the early embryo. And Yamanaka came along and made the same kind of transformation in terms of the difficulty of the problem that we saw a decade earlier with the sequencing of the human genome, which of course accelerated all manner of aspects of biomedical research by an enormous amount. We're seeing that kind of thing repeatedly in biology, and it's what you can expect in any highly complex biotechnological, well, highly complex technological, whether biotechnological or not, discipline. So I don't think that we should be pessimistic and look at the Yamanaka factors and dedifferentiation as the last resort. We're likely to come up with things that are even better and even simpler, even easier, even more efficient.
Thank you very much. So does jury has more questions? So I think we said, wait a second. So we have questions from the audience, but we suggest now jury to score the debate. And in case of the tie, we will use questions from the audience as penalties.
As a tie break.
Okay. I would like to
let's first go for the final scores. Let's first a little specification. The scores from the last round were not precise, so they were like still Peter was the leader, but the Aubrey was two scores below only, so it was not that dramatic change because
Okay, so it's been really difficult to judge here, and I'm sure the other members of the jury agree. And I want to announce the winner, who's Peter Fedichev with 42 and Aubrey with 38. Very close. Very close.
Yeah, guys. First of all, I would like to say
we're going to die. Aging is not reversible.
we have one winner, but we will definitely continue with questions from the audience. But before we will have these questions, I would like to summarize my experience from this debate, and it was the really deep discussion on the topic every one of us are interested in. And this level of discussion, so we have a lot of conferences where the persons just share the vision, but we couldn't evaluate the level of this vision. We couldn't but in case of lack of resources, we all the time should take in consideration what the strategy is prior strategy and what is not prior strategy. Here we need to appreciate all judges who really performed a great work, and I really thank you and thank everyone else who on our screen, because it was really difficult and great job, because it is express vision in questions that are not fully clear to everyone in the world. Yeah. And the second point that I really would like to say thank you for both of debates, debaters, yeah, because it was really difficult job to prepare the vision in scientific field to compete with another vision to just win the speech competition, yeah, in case of jury, in case of, yeah, so it is difficult to propose your vision in competition with another, and it is difficult job. And I think the Peter and Aubrey made really great job to in one hand describe their own position, and in another hand to describe them what is different in their position according to regular vision. And in that case, the win here, which Peter, I really appreciate that he win, but it is the one discussion today, but we need to work a lot to prove his vision or Aubrey vision.
Please don't prove my.
Aubrey, yeah, it is debates. It is speech and conversation to find the best solution, but we need to prove this best solution. Aubrey performed experiment with combination therapies, which is one of the main world great initiatives.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And now questions. Yeah, I will start from question from Carlos, which is friend of our community.
So is this on? Great. Is it on now?
Yeah,
okay.
it is on.
So Peter, thanks so much for a great understandable explanation of your position. The increasing uncorrelated configuration entropy sounds pretty bad, and in some ways Aubrey's flower example maybe gives us hope, but in some ways it was a little wishy-washy. Can you explain why those configuration entropy errors that are uncorrelated build up with age, but we reproduce after many of them have built up? So, and this is the existence proof many people for reprogramming point to is reproduction. So can you explain why that's not a problem through reproduction? And they wanted me to ask this to both of you. The version for Aubrey would be, would the appeal to that existence proof be the thing that your flower analogy was trying to hearken to in partially?
I think my mic.
I think it's going still. Yeah, I think it's working still.
Look, well, first of all, once again, we're discussing things in the realm of unknown, right? So these are speculations, because everything else I was trying to show with numbers. So my take on this is kind of from housekeeping, examples from to appeal to our intuition. So I think everyone who tried to administer a server knows that in principle, server administration is a bunch of reversible operations. You install packages, you deinstall packages. But you know that if your server works for a sufficiently long time, you probably want to restart it to reinstall it from zero, right? So over time, the complexity of operations becomes such that it's much easier to take your software, the important software, to backup and to reinstall everything from the scratch. So I think nature does the same with our software. So what nature is doing is that it throws away our bodies. And then instead of fixing, it's not like nature reinstalls, uninstalls all the packages in order to make a younger individual. It simply takes a system that resets everything to factory settings. That's what we do with our phones when we're fed up with administration. So I think what this reprogramming actually is used in nature for is for factory reset, never to fix. If this helps. I mean, that's the way I try to approach this. I mean, when reproduction comes, it's really like everything is get.
So that's the question. So to answer the version of the question that you asked me, I would say no, it doesn't help, because the evolved function of OKSM or whatever, whether it's other factors addition, is the factory reset. It's to take things back to the entirely totipotent fertilized egg state, from which the program, not the epi program, the actual genetic program knows what to do to go forward to create the tree of differentiation. Now, the problem that we have in biomedical terms is that, you and I are quite fond of our central nervous systems and so on. We'd like to do only a small amount of reversion and not to lose cell identity too much. And therefore we are hijacking, we are repurposing a system that was evolved for one purpose to do something that it wasn't evolved to do. And it's bound to be imperfect. The question is how imperfect. And what I'm saying is that the evidence from partial reprogramming as we see it in vivo today, even though we're not very good at it yet, gives cause for optimism that the amount of what I was calling here informatic redundancy will suffice to let us combat the accumulation of noise for a lot longer than a decade or so. Maybe for hundreds of years, which is enough for us to not worry about it yet.
Hi. So all cells have the same DNA, but they get differentiated through an epigenetic template, right? That defines each cell at the time of. What Aubrey mentioned earlier was that there is this loss of information. What David Sinclair mentions as well. And then that's why we don't have the stability of this template, and the cell begins to lose its functions and could be a cause of aging. You as well brought up stability, Peter, and you brought up that entropy could be one of the causes for this destabilization through thermodynamic entropy. But there is multicellular species today on this planet, which has been studied by a scientist, Richard Dixon, which has bypassed this, where it remains young for thousands of years with all its functions. This has been studied with a group of 20-year-old trees. This is the tree, Ginkgo biloba. 200-year-old group of 200-year-old trees and group of 600-year-old trees. And the paper is a fascinating paper where he is describing all the functions, including immune defense, sexual fertility. All of that is maintained at youthful levels. There is no difference between a 20-year-old tree and a 600-year-old tree. I mean, the difference is very minor.
Right.
They also compared genes, I think 26,700 genes or something. And they found only 4.5% difference between the gene expression in the 20-year-old group and the 600-year-old group. If there was entropy as a cause of damage or destruction, then how did this tree manage to bypass this and adapt itself to overcome this?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. I think I started from the very beginning that I'm personally very fascinated with these examples of animals, not necessarily trees, also naked mole rats, bats, and everyone else in that league that show no signs of at least aging acceleration demographically. I also know that if you look at modern genomic data like DNA methylation, you can still see aging drift there. So there is the accumulation of epimutations in these species. What I believe is happening is that certain species that are ecologically not sophisticated, that are eaten all the time, they are optimized for growth, they don't care for repair, and they exponentially explode in the lab in 2 years. So every more sophisticated animal, including humans, first gets stable, we're not exploding anymore, and then we start accumulating this aging drift that is entropic, bad, configurational entropy, and everything else. Still, the rate of this drift is encoded in our DNA. So probably species that don't have menopause, for example, that can reproduce forever, can get the gene pool enriched with genes that are controlling that aging drift better than us. So that's why maybe those trees, naked mole rats, are better. So as I said, I didn't say that. I said my punch is that it's hard to rejuvenate. It's hard to move back in time. But the rate at which you're going forward, it's in our hands. And that's what I'm suggesting as a focus of longevity research for the next 10 years. Maybe also, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because as Aubrey is saying, everyone else is doing Yamanaka factors, right? So that's why I'm not concerned.
Yeah. So I have a rather more fundamental answer to your question, which is because your question is focused on species that are not mammals, in fact, they're not vertebrates, right? They don't have a central nervous system. The question really comes down to semantics. Is a tree a single organism at all? We choose to say that it is, but is it? I mean, if you ask the question, which is the right question to ask, how long has it been since a particular cell in a tree divided? Hayflick actually asked this question in a popular book he wrote many, many years ago, 30 years ago. He pointed out that even 5,000-year-old trees, there's not a single cell in such a tree that has been non-dividing for more than about 30 years. And that's really important because cell division is a spectacularly powerful and ubiquitous rejuvenating process. It, of course, dilutes away non-genetic damage like waste products, but also it selects away genetic damage, including epigenetic damage. And it requires the reimposition of epigenetic states. So, of course, as you know, when the new strand of DNA is synthesized, it's got no methylation, right? That methylation has to be imposed by reference to the old strand. And, and differentiation is on top of that. And the amount that we don't know about how de novo methylation and demethylation and histone modification happens at all. So all of that is programmed. It's not noise, it's the absence of noise. It's the it's what the genome already knows how to do. And as such, we can't really analogize at all between what happens in organisms that have regular cell division and organisms that don't, or at least some tissues of which don't.
One more question.
I have a question, if possible. So to Peter first. So I want to extend the question that was asked before to the animals that can regenerate. So if amphibians can regenerate limbs, let's say, it's possible to do on the macroscopic level. Why isn't possible to do at microscopic level and regenerate like a young food tissue?
Well, as I discussed, regeneration is a little bit beyond my pay grade. Because
I'll do it. It's not beyond mine.
Yes, please.
Okay, simple answer is cancer. That organisms have to avoid cancer, and most higher organisms, most vertebrates, have chosen to do it by sacrificing regeneration, by switching at a relatively early stage in development. In humans, it's around 8 weeks, if I remember rightly, through a thing called the embryonic fetal transition, following which the default response to injury or any need to fix stuff up is scarring fibrosis rather than regeneration, as in cell division. Before then, that doesn't happen. Now, a salamander, for example, which is one of these exceptional vertebrates that have, as you say, this very good regenerative capacity, it just doesn't go through the embryonic fetal transition. It stays what in mammals would be called embryonic, so that scarring just doesn't happen. Fibrosis doesn't happen, they regenerate instead. Of course, they also have a problem of cancer, but they solve it in other ways, which we don't really understand.
Okay, may I ask?
Did you just say that if you solve cancer, then we can have rejuvenation?
Yes, absolutely, that's what I said.
Okay, may I ask now a question to Aubrey? So first of all, I want to say that I believe in your position because bees rejuvenate in nature, and I believe rejuvenation is mechanistically possible. And now the question that I want to ask: can damage accumulation and rejuvenation live together? So if we speak about accumulation, the word accumulation includes a unilateral error of time. So if we can go back in time and toss the damage, then we expect it to happen every time an old animal, let's say, found food enough to repair itself, become young again, go and replicate, and be evolutionary successful. So this is a formal prediction of the combination between damage accumulation and rejuvenation.
I don't understand.
So, so let's say we have damage accumulation is unilateral. You cannot
unidirectional. Yeah.
Yeah. If you cannot go back, right, then it can work. If it can, if we can go back, then evolutionary theory predicts it to happen all the time.
Oh, okay.
But we don't see it that much.
Yes, we do. Okay, so this is kind of inherent in the definition of damage. Damage, in my definition, is defined as things that the body does not have the machinery to repair. In other words, it's defined as something that can only go in one direction. It can only accumulate. If there is something that the body does know how to repair, then it does repair it. And because damage accumulates, necessarily accumulates really, really, really slowly, or else we'd be dead before we could reproduce, therefore, any mechanism that can repair damage, even really inefficiently, will repair it far faster than that type of damage is occurring. So that damage will not exist in the body. Maybe it'll exist in for a temporary period during a stress situation like an infection, for example, but basically it doesn't appear. So the only things that I consider to come under the category called damage are things that the body does not know how to repair.
If evolution it did not invent the way to repair this damage,
right?
Can we do it better than it?
Sure we can, because the point is evolution only invents things that it can be bothered to invent. Evolution only has machinery that is useful often enough to provide selective pressure to outrun the accumulation of spontaneous mutations. Any gene that we might have that's useful, but it's only useful once every million years, will go away because in much less than a million years, it will mutate into oblivion. That's why calorie restriction works so much less well in long-lived species than in short-lived species, because long famines are simply less frequent in nature than short famines.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
Hi. So if long-term solutions for rejuvenations are not possible within the course of the next 5 decades, I'm okay with that as soon as the aging can be stopped now. Within the course of the 10 years, I would simply wait. So what is your take on the current possible solutions for the abatement of the dynamic changes in Peter's terminology, like, I don't know, mitochondria transfusion or whatever? What can help us to wait for the rejuvenation pill?
Well, a lot of the dynamic changes, the ones that do not come under the informatic or thermodynamic category that Peter was talking about, things are going pretty well. So one thing that's going on right now, just let me give you one illustration just for sake of argument. One thing that I proposed 25 years ago was that we might be able to get rid of certain waste products in cells by identifying and administering enzymes found in bacteria. And that was a pretty crazy idea back then, but after a bunch of work that we funded, it went into the private sector, into a startup company, and they pursued it further, and it's now being sold to big pharma. That's the first application was for macular degeneration, which is driven by the accumulation of one particular rather specific waste product, but it can be applied much more generally. So yeah, I mean, we're getting there, but it's, you know, it's drug discovery. It's a slow process. It's not even drug discovery. This is enzyme therapy. So it's hard, but we're getting there.
What about mitochondrial transfers?
Mitochondrial transplantation. Okay, that's a really interesting area right now. So mitochondria definitely go downhill, but they go downhill in aging in two ways. One way is they just are more lethargic. They don't do as much as they used to. And the other way is they accumulate mutations. Now, I'm not interested in the first of those, the lethargic part, because that is a response to other things that are happening. They do this basically, well, I think they do it basically in order to reduce the amount of free radicals they create. Just, you know, they try to work that hard to compensate the kind of the set point, the trade-off changes. The mutations are a different matter entirely. They accumulate and they, I believe, cause a lot of problems, and we have to fix that. Now, mitochondrial transplantation doesn't fix either of those problems, really. The way that most people are doing it, companies like Selvi and Minovia, is basically a very short-term infusion of goodies, whether it's ATP, whether it's other goodies that get released by the degradation of the mitochondria. Yeah, but it's really, it only has a very short-term benefit, which may translate into a longer-term benefit by knock-on effects, but that's kind of luck, really. Now, there's one company named Mitrix, which are going a lot further. They're doing a clever thing. I say it's clever because it was my idea, which is to inject mitochondria not just naked, but rather encapsulated in a vesicle. And that allows them to have a much better chance of lasting long-term when they get into cells, for reasons that I could go into, but I'm not going to. Now, even they still have some way to go. It's not really working yet, but it's got a lot more of a chance. And there, we might be able to fix the real problem, which is the mutations. But we'll only fix that if we also, in addition to all of this transplantation business and the vesicles and so on, if we also engineer the DNA in the mitochondria to do something called gene drive. And that is another whole kettle of fish.
Yeah, Peter, so you have mentioned that there are a lot of uncorrelated changes over time that does increase the entropy state measured. But what is the proof that these uncorrelated changes has a causal impact on aging? Because if it doesn't have a causal impact, then the stemness induced due to OKSM would actually rejuvenate the cells.
Yeah.
And also, if I just look at a cell, and even if I calculate the entropy in a completely reverse direction, right, I go from an aged individual and I try to calculate the changes, I try to calculate the uncorrelated changes in the cell for an individual when they were chronologically 100 years age to 0 years age, and I would still observe that the entropy has increased in the reverse direction. So entropy anyways increases because you are continuously measuring something.
Yeah, the argument, it's not because it's entropy, it's just because, okay, I mean, first it's just a great question because I think in your book, Aubrey, you discussed a few years ago, the idea that if you were discussing mutations and epi mutations, and you were putting up arguments suggesting that these bad mutations are probably not that bad because they are different in different cells and everything else, right?
Right.
So obviously
Except in the case of cancer.
Yeah, and you discuss specifically cancer, of course. Obviously, there has to be a proof that this linear accumulation of damage is causative for something else. I have to confess that the direct evidence does not exist because we don't have an experiment where this damage is either reduced or stopped, and then we would see some effect on lifespan. Mice simply don't give us such opportunity right now. So at this time, this argument flows from modeling, because we have a model that relates this linear damage to this hyperbolic activation of stress responses that actually kill the animal. So the linear accumulation of damage doesn't kill, but it perturbs the regulatory landscape in such a way that unwanted transition, diseases, and everything else become possible. So at this time, this is a neat theoretical argument that relies on a certain physical intuition. Roughly, the intuition is such that nature does not know how to calculate square roots. Nature knows how to multiply by nonlinear interactions, but you cannot calculate power 1/2. So you have seen that the features that are killing us are kind of hyperbolic. So the most natural explanation is that they are nonlinearly coupled to the linear feature. So once again, I mean, if this doesn't work, aging, first we will be happy because aging will be reversible. And second, if we could explain that, one of us will get a position in a prestigious physics university. Unfortunately, life is more boring than that. Most of the time it works like in a textbook. And at this time, the common knowledge is that the linear process is the driver and the weakly nonlinear processes are enslaved and adaptively follow that. So first, I appreciate that you point this out. And that's why I'm bringing this idea of experimenting with dogs. So for example, if you trusted me blindly that this phenotype is the really bad thing, we could just go to mice and measure this phenotype, right? But as you properly state, somebody has to prove that this phenotype is actually causative. And for that, I mean, with humans it's a bit more complicated. So with that, you have to go to dogs. So fortunately, dogs exist, and they have this, and they live longer. So I think what will happen in a few coming years is that somebody will measure this in mice, because that's easy. And then somebody will go with this kind of drugs to dogs, and they will, I mean, with the time frames provided by these animals, you can see the effect.
I had a question addressed to you, kind of in the vein of thermodynamics, partially colored by my background as a chemist. I'm always interested to see in obedience to the second law of thermodynamics. Of course, you can reverse entropy if you pay an energetic penalty.
Yeah.
And I think in these specific cases where you've identified it, it definitely does look like something that's very much a second law flavored problem. Like, what does that inevitable payment of the energetic penalty to go back to the unmixed liquid, so to speak?
Sure.
What does that look like to you?
Well, there is a great modern textbook on statistical mechanics, and there is a problem there. And the problem is really like how much cookies you need to eat per day to fix all your DNA, and it's just one. So there is no energetic punishment for that. No problem whatsoever. The problem is that, how to say, well, I'm also evolving with that, and I think there is a good discussion about this, what is called generalized second law right now in physics. Stephen Wolfram, for example, one of the guys who is kind of pushing this discussion. So historically, it was a discussion about open and closed system. And whenever the system was open, everyone was rushing and crying that now you can do whatever you want with the entropy. I think a more nuanced approach is that, well, obviously you can do whatever you want if you have total control. So if you can measure all positions, all states in your system, and if you can come with with very exact intervention, you can do whatever you want, right?
It's more an expensive time and effort.
Yes, it's like what Stephen Wolfram is, his argument is that for computationally bound unsophisticated observer, and believe in biotech, we are very unsophisticated observers right now. That's my point. So when the degree of our sophistication will reach the level of controlling microscopic states, no problem whatsoever.
It's like a big bomb versus a sniper rifle.
Look, we are coming there with drugs that come to the wrong part of the tissues a lot, maybe sometimes to the right tissue, into every cell at the same time. So think how much microscopic states you average at that time. So that's what
I always shudder to think how biologists continue on with their professions, given
I mean,
chemistry, that's
yeah,
an enormous problem also.
The fundamental thing is
unintended effects.
The fundamental thing is we have empirical evidence that medicine is possible.
Yes.
And that is despite the fact that we know very nearly nothing about how the body works.
Yes.
So essentially what this tells us is that if we define medicine as enhancing the body's innate ability to export entropy, right? In other words, removing entropy that the body doesn't already know how to remove on its own, right? Then we're just getting, increasingly good at removing entropy from the body. That's what we're doing.
That's
And
the miracle of life.
and the body is on our side. The body is trying to remove entropy on its own. It's quite good at it, but it's not quite good enough for our satisfaction. So we augment that with medicine. And as our medicine gets better, we get less and less entropy left that we don't know how to remove.
And I guess to mitigate that, I guess maybe to chemistry, but enthalpic cost to reverse that entropy.
Yeah, and it'll get about
the earlier you do it, the better.
Oh, really?
I wouldn't even go that. No, I wouldn't
Yeah.
say that. I think I mean, yes, but only qualitatively, because as Peter mentioned, the actual enthalpic cost is actually pretty small. So it's not something that we need to take into account. What we need to take into account is the sophistication of the machinery that works at all, however much the enthalpic cost.
So the enthalpy cost in GPU hours, in this case.
How much focus do you think we should have on replacing tissues and organs in whole, maybe via clone sources?
As little as possible, but that probably doesn't mean no. Essentially, my take is that we're quite likely to end up needing to do macroscopic interventions for a short while as we reach longevity escape velocity. There'll be certain tissues that are just really hard to fix up rather than replace. But that's going to be no fun. Surgery is no fun. And therefore, there will be huge pressure to move beyond that into the point where we can do everything at the microscopic level.
Any more questions?
To manufacture disagreement in the okay. Thank you very
No,
much.
Peter is going to manufacture disagreement. One second.
Okay,
Go.
1 second is over. So look, maybe to your question, if you decide to share my position and start looking for options, then yeah, so if you trust me on that, so the replacement of organs is the only daring, last resort dash against the second law of thermodynamics, which means that if any technology, in my view, has an appeal to sort this thing out, is this kind of partial replacement. But let's say everyone underestimates the effects of new technologies in the short run and totally underestimate in the long. So I think we are now overestimating the abilities of this technology in the next 10 years. That's my.
At the cellular peak, like let's say at puberty, when let's say the epigenetic template is really stable, and we are able to, repair all possible damage, protect ourselves from everything. Your own statistics, which is propensity to die, is probably at the lowest, just around puberty. So there are already technologies in nature. It's not science fiction. All we have to do is maintain that stability.
Yeah, to stop aging is possible. That's what I'm preaching here.
Right.
Many other things are good at puberty, so why not? I agree.
So it's probably time to thank our speakers. It was awesome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all very much. Let's make common peace.
Yeah.
Just to write something useful. Misha?
To the game. Time warriors, rise and shout. Breaking limits, casting doubt. Time warriors, rise and shout. Breaking limits, casting doubt. Aubrey and Peter face to face. In this clash, we find our place.